about 8:28, so I'd ask you that you fill those coffee cups up, get whatever refreshments you would like, and be ready to get started on time this morning. Good morning, everybody. If I could get you to come to attention, that would be wonderful. Our guest speaker has arrived this morning, our first speaker, Mr. Franklin. It's always our goal to get you out of here on time today. I had an opportunity to speak with our highway commissioner up in Wood County this morning. They said the roads up in that area, heading north, I-39, that corridor are in great shape right now. They said good winter driving conditions, so you should have a fairly easy trip home when you go through that area. So good morning to everybody, and welcome to the second day of the 2016 Legislative Exchange. At this time, I would ask you to please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Once again, today we have a very full agenda. We're going to try to keep that on track. We are going to be joined by the governor this morning, and he runs a pretty tight schedule also, so we're going to try to keep to that. For those of you who had the opportunity to sit in this chair from time to time, you get a pretty tight script. It kind of looks like this. Well written, everything I'm supposed to say, but there's a part on here that says, Lance, you may make additional comments at this time. So I'm going to take about 1 minute advantage of that at the most. First of all, I want to thank all of you for your attendance. And I really want to thank those who asked those questions from the audience, because it is what drives the conversation. It's what shapes our agenda and our legislative platform. So I appreciate all those comments. We discussed those at our board meetings. We discussed those at the Local Government Institute meetings. It's extremely important. This is an organization that derives its strength from the ground up. It's from you, the members. And we are an exceptionally well-respected organization. I know you heard it from our executive director yesterday, Mark O'Connell, but I can tell you, and I've had the opportunity for a number of years through the different organizations that we have within this family, to know every single member of our staff, and they are incredible. They're intelligent, they're talented, and the one thing I will guarantee you is nobody will outwork them. I've seen them here at 6 in the morning, I've seen them here at 10 at night, preparing for these type of events. So On behalf of myself and the entire Counties Association, I'd like to thank the staff and Executive Director O'Connell, and I ask that you please give them a round of applause. And I did just have the opportunity to return from Washington, D.C., a trip I was on with Mark, and I can tell you this. I've heard it from other presidents who have served before me, but he is extremely well respected amongst that organization. There's not a single meeting I didn't go to where they constantly ask what Mark's opinion would be, what his stance was, or what direction Wisconsin was going. So extremely respected amongst his peers, and I think that's extremely important. The other thing I want to touch on is, and when we talk about platforms, is one of the mantras of this association has been, we typically won't take a position on any issue unless it benefits all 72 counties. And we will continue with that thought process. We'll move forward. And again, I thank you for your participation. I'm going to get out of here, so we'd rather listen to the governor than me. So, well, with nothing further ado, Mark, podium is yours. Thanks.
All right. Oh, okay. Thank you, Lance. Yes. Okay, a couple quick items. One, cell phones on silent or vibrate, please. And then secondly, reminder to everyone that we are streaming live on Wisconsin Eye, so your best television look would be great. Just be aware, because it's forever. It'll be broadcast live, but then it can be repeated. Yesterday I told you that we were going to have a special speaker today, Mr. Charles Franklin. I indicated to you if you show up at sharp at 8:35, because you're going to find out who's going to win the elections. Charles Franklin is perhaps the most preeminent pollster and predictor of election turnout, quite frankly, from what I've seen in the nation. We are so fortunate that he is here in Wisconsin. I would say, just to shorten up his bio, please join me in welcoming to the podium, with a warm Wisconsin Counties Association welcome, Nostradamus of today.
Nostradamus is a nice name. I have been called mad scientist. I tried to get my dean to put the title on my door that I was a full mad scientist at the law school. It's important. Sorry. Okay, I'm going to jump right in without too much further ado. We've got a wide range of things to cover. We'll make sure that there's some Q&A time at the end. I want to take you through a wide overview of the state of the state. No technical problem at all. And now you will get to see that I ran it through the inside of my shirt, so now everybody gets to see my undershirt. Thanks. Appreciate it. Okay. No discombobulation or anything. I got to say, I did not know the TSA had a sense of humor until I went through the Milwaukee airport where it says recombobulation area. I would like to praise them publicly, but it'll probably get them fired for having a sense of humor. Okay, back to this. What's the state of the state? How do we see it? And so on. I think you will hear from someone in a few minutes who says, we're coming back. The state is in great shape. We're recovering. You'll hear from others who will say things are not so good. I'm not a half full or half empty kind of guy. I'm a kind of guy that says the glass holds 16 ounces and I measured 8 ounces in it. And so that's the goal here, is to try to talk about both the positive and the negative, and where are we, rather than brand it as great or bad. Here, though, is some undeniably good news. Advertising that's trying to hire people at the Amazon distribution center at a pretty good pay rate, and notice the job requirements. You don't have to have a high school diploma. You don't have to have a GED. You start right away. Your benefits start immediately, get paid every 2 weeks. Those are good, low-skill jobs that we're seeing advertising for. As I drive around the state, one of my key indicators is how many gas stations and convenience stores have help wanted signs up as I pull in. And over the last few years, I've seen such an interesting transition from never seeing any of those signs to seeing them widely now. So that's the good side here. But when we look at what's happened from before the Great Recession to after the Great Recession, the picture in the country as a whole is not very good, and here in the state it's not very good. In this map, those sort of light, whatever you'd call that, yellowish parchment colors, are no change in real income from before the recession to after. The green areas, up through the oil belt really, are the areas where median income rose for families. But the purple areas are where current median real income, adjusted for inflation, is down. And you can see from looking where I'm sure you're all looking, that it's not a very pretty picture for us. Now, it's fair to look at this and say that's over a 5-year period. It's the most reliable data we have from 5 years leading up to the year of the recession to the 5 years after. But of course, things change in 5 years. So let's look at the state on an annual basis. This again is the best data we have annually on statewide real or median household income. And you can see the blue and the red. The blue is the U.S., the red's Wisconsin. We're running pretty close to each other, not much difference, and there's an upward trend. But while inflation has been very low for the last 10 years, it hasn't been zero. And so if we adjust for inflation, this is what the picture looks like. The good news was the bad news was we suffered really terrible declines during the recession and in its immediate aftermath, and we've mostly flattened out. But Wisconsin's flattening out really is only in the 2014 year that it ticked slightly up, though we weren't dramatically declining either, but it's hardly a picture of robust recovery, nor is the country as a whole a picture of robust recovery. So as a result, look here, this is 55,000 median household income, so that's 56, 57. The peak was about 58,000. 55, 54, 53, 52. So we're back at about 53. So we're down quite a bit for an average family compared to where we were before. And while things are getting slightly better, we're not recovering quickly for sure. So when you look at the presidential race and state and local races and people are feeling like they're not better off than they were recently, there's a pretty good reason not to feel like you're better off. Here's the good news, though, and this is the drop in the unemployment rate. Again, the gray line is national, the blue line is Wisconsin. Our unemployment rate did not rise as high as the national did. It has fallen in tandem with it, and today sits below where the national rate is. Can't really tell, it ticked up by 0.1% last month, but that's as likely to be measurement error as anything. The big picture is not, unfortunately what gets the headlines is, did we add 300 jobs last month? Did the unemployment rate stay steady or move by 0.1 point? Those month-to-month variations are far less important than looking at this long-term trend. And it does look like a good trend. We have, relatively speaking, good unemployment rates compared to the country as a whole. But our job production rate is somewhat less good. And I want to look at this over a long period of time, so there's not a question of cherry-picking just the most recent data or comparing a good period with a bad period or vice versa. This is the number of jobs that the state has added since 1990. So as we start in 1990, you can see us adding jobs during the 90s. You can see the 2001 recession hitting us. You can see the Great Recession hitting us, and you can see the recovery from there. And I've picked the standard that the governor popularized in his first campaign, that the goal should be adding 250,000 jobs in his first 4 years as governor. I want to stress that I'm not picking that as a political point, but as an economic benchmark. Was adding 250,000 jobs in 4 years ever a realistic goal? given the state of our economy, not given the politics of this. And so the question here is, have we ever added at that rate? Well, to get to 250,000, you'd need to add 62,500 jobs a year on average, right? During the 1990s, we mostly did that. Early in the 90s, 69,000 a year. Late in the 90s, 62.5 a year. We had a little bit of a slowdown in the middle. Over that whole period, we averaged 60,000 new jobs a year in the state. To me, that's certainly close enough to 62,500 for government work, and call that 250,000 jobs over a 4-year period. Then we hit the early 2000s recession, and not only did we lose jobs, but it was a long time before we started to recover. People called it a jobless recovery at the time, and I think you can see from the data that the recession technically ends about here, but it's really 2 more years before we started to dig our way out of that early 2000s recession. But by 2004, we were growing fairly robustly, but at a rate of 34,000 a year, roughly half the 62.5 that we were doing as our goal or earlier in the previous decade. And then we get a slowdown in the last 2 years before the Great Recession hits, where we were adding just 17,000 a year, okay? Then the recession hits, we lose this enormous number of jobs. In 2010, the last year of the Doyle administration, we added 31,700 jobs. Now, the recession technically ends at 2009, so 2010 is a growth period, and we're at call it 32,000. Then here is the time since then, beginning in 2011. Our goal to hit 62.5 would be this dotted line, adding 62.5 a year. The blue line is what we've actually added. There are a couple of points to be made here, at least. The first is how consistent job growth has been since 2011. There's month-to-month small fluctuations in that, but the trend you can see is nearly a straight line for the last 5 years. Secondly, that trend line is actually pretty much the same trend that we saw in 2010. Averaged over the entire period since the beginning of 2011, we've added 31.3 thousand a year versus 31.7 thousand a year in 2010. My point is, it's hard to look at that trend and say the politics made much of a difference between the last year of the Doyle administration and the Republican control of state government since. At least measured in this measure, I don't see that it shot up. I don't see that it shot down. It looks like a continuation. And what would that be? Because the structure of our state economy and the structure of the national economy is simply only capable right now of producing job growth that's in the low to mid 30,000 range, not the kind of job growth we saw in the 90s in the 62,000 job range. So what does that mean? It means our picture of our economy and what the state can reasonably be expected to do needs to be a little more limited to be realistic. That's not necessarily a good thing to have a limited vision, but to be realistic about what our ability to grow jobs are, at least in the last 7 years, 6 going on 7 years, about 30,000, a little better, is where we've been. Okay, so half full or half empty, I leave it to you, but this is what the measurement shows. This is where we have been. Let's look at public opinion. This is from our Marquette Law School poll. Last April, so last spring, just as people were turning in their tax returns, 31% said that the economy had gotten better over the last year. 26% said it had gotten worse. This month, those numbers reverse. 26% better, 31% say the economy's gotten worse over the last year. That's not an enormous shift, but it's down 5 points on better. It's up 5 points on worse. It at least should make us a little bit concerned. If we look at the future, people are usually pretty optimistic about the future, but relatively more pessimistic about the past. A year ago, or April ago, 31% said better, just 18 said they thought the economy would get worse over the next 12 months. And where we are today is 27 and 25, essentially parity between those two. So again, not massive pessimism about the future, but a shift in a trend that looks like more pessimism about where we're headed. And that should worry us a little bit. Let's switch to national politics and how people see these things. We're kind of segueing into elections here as well. A lot of the national outlook depends on the economy, and I just showed you some mixed picture about that. And on presidential approval, here's President Obama's job approval throughout his term. And you can see that approval as of, day before yesterday, was about 47%. And you can see how flat it has been for most of his administration. In fact, if you look at every president since World War II, this is Obama up here, notice how relatively little variation there is in his job approval compared to President Bush or President Clinton, and I could go through all the rest for the historians. Here's Franklin Roosevelt. Every president except Jerry Ford, wherever Jerry Ford is, here, who wasn't in office all that long, every other president has shown more variability in their presidential approval. So given how intensely polarizing President Obama is, you might be really surprised by how little variation there's been. Let's look at why. Here are Democrats. They love the president. 79% approval rating right now. Here are independents, 36% now, but you can see in the first term, after the honeymoon, they were kind of flat, a little bit of wobble. After the re-election, they dropped off a few points, almost 10 points, and a little wobble. And then kind of weirdly, after the Republican victories in the 2014 election, decided maybe it wasn't so bad and moved slightly back up in his favor. So there's a little bit of movement in the independents. Here's the Republicans. Here's the punchline. If you look at this chart, where is killing Osama bin Laden? Republicans are so negative about the president that success, even that, didn't gain him any credit among this group. And if I back up to the Democrats, even the disastrous rollout of the Affordable Care Act websites didn't produce any drop in his approval. So the point is, one of the reasons that Obama's overall approval has been so flat compared to previous presidents is that as a country, nationally as well as here in the state, we are so polarized about him that we don't reward him for success or punish him for failure. And I would actually argue that's a bad thing. Here, for example, is satisfaction with how things are going in the country, starting with the first President Bush and then Clinton and second President Bush and Obama. What you can see during the Bush administration is that people in the president's party think the country's doing better. People in the opposition party think worse. Well, duh, of course that's going to happen. But look at how the two lines move in parallel. When the opposition party thinks things are worse, so does the president's party. Look at Clinton. Started out kind of low, but when things got better, both sets of partisans moved in the direction of saying things are getting better. That was responding to real outcomes in the country. When we get to the second President Bush, things start out up here, but the Democrats, the opposition party, drop off fast and at a time when Republicans are moving in the opposite direction. And then Democrats flatten out and just don't drop any further. They really have not much room to drop further. And eventually, in the second term, Republicans joined them in saying Iraq and the economy and other things are pretty bad. So there was movement in the president's party there. But now look at the Republicans in the Obama administration. No movement whatsoever. and actually minimal movement among the president's party. What you're seeing here is that through the Clinton administration, we saw both parties responding to good and bad conditions roughly equally, though from different baselines. Since about halfway through the second President Bush's administration, we've seen an opposition party that simply sees no redeeming value whatsoever in the president, regardless of party. And in the president's party, we've seen not a whole lot of movement one way or another. I think that's unfortunate from a normative perspective for representative government and control. It would be nice if people got rewarded for good outcomes and punished for bad outcomes. Perhaps even good thing, even if it's not their fault. That one's debatable. All right, now let's talk about what's going to happen coming up. Basically, nothing's going to change, so we can move on. These are Charlie Cook's ratings for the House of Representatives, and the bottom line is when you only have this handful of 16 races considered toss-ups, and even if you generously added in the leaning districts, there's no way you have a plausible scenario for the Democrats to retake the House of Representatives, at least not in one single cycle. Now, it's always conceivable a giant wave election comes up, but it doesn't seem to be in the forecast at this point. You will notice the highlight here. We did add Wisconsin 8th as a leaning Republican district just this week. Was not there before. Here's an important point about another reason to expect less variability, and a little complicated. What this chart shows is the ratio of the percentage of seats in the House that a party wins compared to the percentage of votes nationwide that that party wins. So if a party got 40% of the vote and got 40% of the seats, that ratio would be 1.0. Likewise, if they got 55% of the votes and 55% of the seats, the ratio would be 1.0. So anything above 1 means the party is getting a higher percentage of seats than they deserve from the percentage of votes that they got. And this is scaled so Democratic advantages up top, Republican advantages down here. And you can see from 1940 up until the 1992 election, Democrats typically got about 10% more seats than they deserved based on their nationwide vote percentage. That changed with the 1994 Gingrich revolution, with Republicans taking control of the House for the first time in quite a while. And since that time, there's been a modest Republican advantage with the exception of 2008. But since then, that advantage has started to approach a 10% Republican advantage, roughly the same advantage that the Democrats enjoyed during the period of their ascendancy. So what does this mean? In conjunction with not very many closely contested seats, it also means the minority party has to win more than their fair share of votes in order to reach even a majority. And so this also reduces the chances of a Democratic takeover of the House in the short term. The fact that this happened in '94 and this whole picture reverse shows that it can be done, but it isn't easy to do. Here's the Senate side. Again, we have a race in this, the Wisconsin toss-up Senate race. Here the Democrats need to pick up 4 seats or possibly 5 seats, depending on who wins the presidency. You can see that there are only 5 toss-up races in the country, at least by this rating. And so it'd be not impossible, but it'll be difficult for Democrats to have that kind of gain. Again, if there's a wave election, that could happen. But absent a wave, if they're really toss-ups, they should split 50-50. So out of the 5 toss-ups, Dems should get 2.5, Republicans should get 2.5. That's a modest net gain in the Senate. Things can always change. Senate races are more dynamic. Things can break. Things can change suddenly. But that's the basis of my saying I don't think at the congressional level we're going to see change in control of either house. So then it's only a question on the presidential side is who's in the White House. And are they willing partners or are they veto opponents? And that's anybody's guess. So here's our latest polling data, just from last week. What if we see the Democratic field Clinton and Sanders? We have them 2 points apart here in the state. Of course, they fought to a tie in Iowa Monday night. If we look at people, we ask people, who do you expect to win the nomination? Clinton has more of an advantage. 65 think she's expected to win, 27 Sanders. Given the close result last Monday night, and whatever happens in New Hampshire next Tuesday, when we go in the field and ask again, I expect to see this shift quite a bit. But we want to see what expectations were before any of the voting began and now that we actually have real votes. How does it shift? Here on the Republican side, Donald Trump was leading in the state with 24%, followed by Rubio at 18 and Cruz very close behind at 16. Again, the same story applies. Now that we've actually seen some votes, where will we be in mid-February when we ask again? Will people have shifted their support throughout this, or possibly one of these candidates further back move up? It's striking that you don't see Jeb Bush on this chart because he's not in the top 6 here in the state, something I would never have expected a year ago. And on the expectation side, 49% think Trump will be the nominee of the party. Again, surely that's going to change depending on how well he does in the next few weeks, and likewise for the other people on this list. So it's not so much that this is a prediction of what will happen, but rather, how are people thinking about the race now, and how does that thinking change as they begin to see the campaign work its way out? I'm going to go quickly through this. Clinton is leading each of the Republicans, but by only a single point against Rubio and Cruz. Sanders is leading each of the Republicans, but by bigger margins. And so you have this interesting thing that they're roughly tied in the Democratic primary, but he does better than she in statewide voting. The reason for that is he's pulling from independents and leaning Democrats, independents who lean to the Democrats. She's particularly strong among the Democratic base. We'll have to wait and see how that plays out over time. But right now, that's the basis of his advantage. I wanted to skip those to get to the Senate race. Former Senator Feingold at 50%, Senator Johnson at 37%. But here's the trend over the last year, and you can see it's essentially just flat. If we said that Feingold is getting 49 or 50 plus or minus a couple, and Senator Johnson is getting 38 or 9 plus or minus a couple, that would cover this entire chart. There's just no evidence of a big trend yet. And I think that's because most people aren't tuned into it, and we have some evidence of that. When you ask, do you have a favorable, unfavorable, or haven't you heard about the candidate? 41%, 37 not heard, plus another 4 who say they don't know, don't have an opinion of Senator Johnson. That trend has been true for a long time. The can't rate percentage in this yellow line has been higher, except for a couple of points, for him. His favorables have fallen off a little bit and his unfavorables risen, but I was much amused in both his and Feingold's case to discover that over the holidays we forgot about them. The don't rate, no, can't rate bumps up for both of them a little bit. That'll change when the advertising wars begin. Here's Feingold. He's more advantaged on favorability, and even though he's been out of office for 5 years, more advantaged on name recognition. And you can see his favorabilities, but his unfavorables had been rising until this little Christmas vacation we took. This will be very interesting to watch as the campaign really ramps up. Do we end up with 2 candidates with more unfavorable than favorable? That's exactly what happened in 2012. After the election, both Tommy Thompson and Tammy Baldwin were net negative on their favorability, but Thompson more net negative than Baldwin, and of course she won. The governor's job approval numbers, 38 approved, 57 disapproved. Here's the trend on that, and you can see that after 2011, if we stretch this back here before the Marquette poll began, the governor was underwater during much of 2011 in the aftermath of Act 10. His approval was around 40, his disapproval around 55 or so. He recovered from that during the process leading up to the recall and through the re-election. But, of course, in 2015, we see this sharp shift in approval. Where did that shift come from? Interestingly, a lot of it came from Republicans who were unhappy with the presidential run. And they make up 35% of Republicans in the state. So that's a pretty big group that dropped their approval rating and didn't like the run. On the other hand, this is good news, paradoxically, for the governor, because they're Republicans. They're likely to come back to him later. And so these current lows of approval will tend to sort of naturally come back up as these Republicans come home. The trouble is more among these independents who don't have that natural tendency to come home and also dropped off a good bit in approval. So 3 years is an awfully long time, and by no means is this a prediction, but it shows you where the challenges are for recovery. And here's the other part, closer to your home. What do people think of the state budget? Through most of our polling, and certainly throughout 2014, people thought the budget was in better shape by a fair margin than it used to be. And that reversed this year, with a tough budget being introduced in the spring last year and the debate around it. People's views of the state of the budget have gotten much more negative. Maybe something will happen to change that. Would you like a third term? Not so much, but again, long time away. And it's hardly changed between September and now. Legislative Republicans are not in a lot better shape. Only 31% say they approve of the way Republicans in the legislature are doing their job. But Democrats are not exactly basking in the glory either. Only 39% approve of them. And so this is not unusual. Legislators always take a harder hit than executives do. Very few people approve of people in Congress either. But it is a bit of an issue. I wanted to close. I know you talked a little bit about road funding yesterday. Here's the finding that we have in, in the November poll when this question of borrowing the last $350 million for the roads appropriation was up in the legislature. 38% support that borrowing, 34% oppose, and of course 28% go, what borrowing? Hadn't heard of the issue. This is something that we've looked at a lot, and I'm not going to dwell on it, but when you ask, should we borrow or pay for roads, people say pay for them. They don't like borrowing in the abstract. Even when we asked during the early budget debate, should we borrow X amount, 1.3 billion or whatever this year's number is, people are not real fond of that. But when we get to the end of the budget and it's borrow or do nothing, people go borrow. So the real question, and I think you, from what I heard of it yesterday, you saw it, if you're not going to raise user fees or taxes or other revenue methods, are we in fact going to be where Nygren said during the budget hearings? Are we going to be back in 2 years facing this same issue? He said he didn't want that to happen. You can understand why nobody would want that to happen. But we really do have a tough road to hoe here. I think I'm going to stop there for questions. If you don't have any, I'll subject you to more slides. But because I have some great other slides to show you, but let me leave time for Q&A. Do you want to raise the light so we can see folks a little better? Because otherwise I can't see a thing.
Is there a direct correlation between what happens nationally in Wisconsin?
I have no idea who's
Right over
speaking.
here.
I'm sorry.
Right over here.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Sorry.
It seems like there might be a direct correlation. What happens nationally happens in Wisconsin.
It is certainly true that on a lot of measures we end up somewhere in the ballpark of the national average. Not every, we might be a little above or a little bit below, but we're not wildly different. And of course, we're one of 50 states, right? What happens at the national level, of course, affects us. On the other hand, what's happening right now in China is hurting our heavy manufacturing a lot worse, right? Because who's buying our big coal mining equipment? That's a big problem. And here domestically out west where we have these massive coal mines, you can talk about EPA regulations as part of this, but cheap natural gas from fracking is also a big part of the decline in industrial production for coal and other kinds of mining things. That hurts us worse. Caterpillar, so we're not completely the creatures of the nation, but we're certainly part of that, and now of China and the rest of the world. Yes?
Your early slides of the Wisconsin growth and then decline and then small growth again, what were the majority of those jobs? What sector was it, manufacturing or tourism?
Manufacturing has come down over the long period. In fact, you can see it as a stair step. We have a lot of manufacturing in the 1980s. And then recessions hit and we come down and then we level out for a while. And then the next recession hits and we come down and we level out again. And then Janesville closes and, we're down again. The one exception this year, or this cycle, is that we actually had seen manufacturing jobs coming back in the state. Not hugely, but unlike every one of those stair steps where after the recession it's just been flat in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. After this recession, we actually have seen some growth in manufacturing, but it's, not coming back to the prior levels.
Thanks. I had a question. I saw this just this morning on MSNBC before I left. They had a poll, I don't know who conducted it, on young people for Sanders, and I don't know the number.
Yep.
And it was overwhelmingly, 84%, I think was the number. It was higher than Obama. Do you see that trend here and in other spots as well?
Nothing like that magnitude. Young people, young Democrats, let's talk about it from the primary point of view. Young Democrats are more drawn to him, but I think from the rhetoric, especially stories that say Clinton is not getting young women, we don't see a big bit of evidence for that. There is certainly an age effect, and certainly the younger you are, the higher the Sanders support, but it's a difference of Sanders in the 50s or low 60s, not Sanders in the 80s among that youngest age group. So there certainly is an effect. And other states could well be different. But here in Wisconsin, there's an effect, but it's a somewhat more modest one. The biggest problem in that race is Clinton's unfavorability ratings are high outside the Democratic Party and throughout the state, except for the Madison and Milwaukee media markets. And so when you think of the North, Green Bay, Wausau, the West, La Crosse, those are areas where anybody needs to win some votes statewide, and right now she's really underwater in those areas. On the other hand, when it comes to November, it won't be Clinton against Sanders. It'll be Clinton against a Republican. Depends a whole lot on whether that's an attractive Republican or an unattractive Republican. They might be facing some of the same unfavorability. But right now, that's certainly hurting her when we go to these head-to-head contests in the fall. Sure. How much does polling reflect the public versus affect the public? A little bit of both, but what we see when we look across all races, I'm now talking hundreds, actually into the thousands of polls, hundreds of races since the 1990s, is that there's not much of a relationship at all between the margin that a candidate had in the polls the week before the election and whether they overperform or underperform for that. So if somebody tells you that X is ahead by 5 points and X consistently wins by 8, that would be a suggestion that voters are looking at that poll, they're then going and voting for the winner. On the other hand, if they look at that and say, oh, well, my guy's going to win, I don't need to turn out, then they would consistently underperform, right? Because they wouldn't be getting their voters to the poll. And the beauty is neither of those things happen. Errors can be big, and Monday night you saw some errors in the Iowa polling. But on average, across hundreds and hundreds of races, the errors are roughly symmetric and equal and opposite. So sometimes you're high, sometimes you're low. If we were really driving the vote in those last polls, you'd be systematically high or systematically low, and we're not there. So I don't particularly want, in fact, I especially don't want to influence elections. I want voters to do that. So that's a very happy note for me. Yes, great. Yeah. Well, you need to change your number. It's not very patriotic to have a Phoenix number, you know. We call 50% of our calls on cell phones, so we get cell phones in abundance. That's right at the estimate of the percentage of cell phone-only households in the state. We do it in the same way, and I won't bore you with the methodology, but it gives every number in the state, whether landline or cell phone, has exactly the same probability of being selected into our sample. It's that provides the representativeness of the sample. It doesn't matter where you live or how old or young you are or what your race or sex are. We're giving every one of those numbers the same chance of being called. Now, unfortunately, some of you do not pick up your phone, and I want you to stop it. You have to answer every call, and if it's from us, do the interview. Otherwise, you're welcome to be rude and hang up. But for our people, please pick up. The biggest problem by far is call screening and voicemail. That most of the time, we don't get anybody on the other end of the line. It's not that they answer and say no. It's just they never answer. And that could be for a variety of reasons. The good news is Democrats and Republicans alike hate telemarketers. And therefore, it doesn't bias our sample that a lot of people are call screening because it's an equal opportunity hatred, okay? But nevertheless, I want you to start answering every call and checking.
Professor Franklin, how does...
Wave, I'm sorry.
Right here.
Oh, okay, the light right in my eyes making it hard to...
How does polling benefit democracy, or how is it a disadvantage to democracy?
Because of what I do, I'm not here to destroy democracy, so I'd hate it if that was the case. Here's my main pitch on this. I believe that every candidate does polling. I believe that the vast majority of interest groups do polling. Where is the citizenry represented in that? If we didn't have public polls, whether mine or St. Norbert, which does polling for public radio, or outside agencies that sometimes do things in the state, then the only people that would have the information from polling about what do people think about roads, what do people think about concealed carry, which was one of the ones I didn't get to, which, by the way, support's way up since it was passed. If we don't do that, then it's only the people in control of the political system that have the information. So public polling, to me, is a way of forcing that information out or providing it, if you will. When interest groups or candidates do polls, they release the results that they want you to see, and they don't release the results that they don't want you to see. And duh. Whereas in our poll, we put up the entire questionnaire, every single question in the order it was asked, all of the answers, no matter how they go, and the full set of crosstabs, the breakdowns by demographic groups, plus a 5 or 6 page methodology statement that explains exactly how we do what we did. And so that's the difference to me, is that public polls, and it's not great virtue on my part, that's the standard for academic and public affairs polling throughout the country. Some do it a little more like we do, others a little bit less, but in general they do that. And to me that's the issue. Do you want only those in control of government and interest group affairs to have the information or share it more widely? It doesn't mean we're perfect, right? We could always be wrong, and Monday night shows that. And so right now I think there's a sort of story going around that polling is permanently broken. I think that's a clear exaggeration. But polling is also certainly not perfect. And the trouble is we don't know which night it's going to be perfect and which night it's going to be wrong. And so a little more humility about just how precise they are and what we're hoping to get out of it, I think would be useful. Okay, thanks.
I have 2 questions for you. The first is about getting people to respond. How do your calls come up
Right.
on caller ID, and do your callers identify right away that they're the Marquette poll?
Right.
Or do people have to ask?
Yep. Caller ID says this call is from Satan. Do not answer this call. I don't know. We might get more answers that way. Seriously, it just comes up with the number of the call center that we're using. It doesn't label it anything. Or if it does on some systems, it says Universal Surveys is the company that we use to make the calls. But unlike political polls, the first sentence is, I'm calling on behalf of Marquette University. We have questions about public affairs. And so we identify right at the beginning that it is us. That's part of the human subjects approval that universities go through to be transparent with people that we're calling. But from my point of view, it's better. Now, if you're a candidate making that call, it's perfectly understandable you don't want to identify yourself at the top. That would, from a purely technical point of view, would bias the results of the survey. So campaign polls don't like to do that, even though they're required to divulge it if anybody asks.
Time for that second question. I understand the governor has arrived.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks. Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, maybe we could have answered one more question. The governor just had to take a phone call, and I'm sure somebody's going to wave to me when that opportunity ends. I guess I could tell you a real quick story. The other day, I had the opportunity, like I said, to go to Washington with our executive director, and while at the airport, I was pre-screened, and I'm carrying my baggage through the check-in area, and the alarm goes off. And they pull me over to the side, and I get over there, I look at my daughter who's traveling with me. I said, "What did you bring with you?" The guy looks at me and says, "Can you come over here, sir?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Can I look in your backpack?" I said, "Absolutely." And he opened it up. I had my 4-inch folding hunting knife in my backpack. So this is how my trip started. So since it's over 3 inches, they have to call the sheriff's department, not just the TSA. So the sheriff's department comes over, and he said, this honest to God true story, he says, "Where are you going with that knife, sir?" And I looked at him, I said, "You won't believe this, I'm on my way to the White House today." He said, it's probably a good thing we stopped you here. And he got on the phone, and he made some phone calls. He goes, "You're not kidding." He goes, "You really are." He said, "Can you come over to my office?" And he came over to the office. He started laughing then. He said, "It's probably a good thing we stopped you here." He said, "It's probably a good thing I took out my concealed carry gun before I actually left the parking area." But I had no idea I had left it in there. So he takes it over, and he said, "You don't look like you're probably going to be involved in any criminal activity." He goes, "We're going to let you keep that knife." He goes, "Just take it back to your car and have a good trip." But my daughter filmed this whole thing, and she's sending the pictures to my wife while I'm doing this. And they had a point system arranged as if I was going to kill her before we got back because, you know, she's one of these young PhDs in education who knows everything, and I don't. I was down 15 points before we even left the airport, so that's where we're at. Sarah, how are we doing? We still on a phone call? We're good to go. This is an opportunity that we do not have every year due to some scheduling conflicts, but it is certainly going to be an honor and a privilege to have our governor with us here today. One of the things I want you to consider is there's roughly 320 million people in the United States. There were maybe 20 that were considered as a possible president for this country. And our governor was one of those people respected at that level throughout the country. There's an experienced legislator, a county executive, and obviously a unique situation, a 2-term governor who's been elected 3 times already. That in itself is pretty unique. He's been described as bold, bright, intelligent, unafraid, unabashed, and unintimidated. A man who himself and administration have worked very closely with our legislative team to allow us to provide better services to the state of Wisconsin. So I would ask you to please rise and join me in a warm welcome for Governor Scott Walker, the governor of the state of Wisconsin.
Good morning. Good morning. Well, it's good to see. I said I had to come in, from plowing around the Capitol a couple times, and I know I was thinking actually back today. You mentioned my years as a county executive, and I think Supervisor Johnson remembers this. We used to go out with the Public Works team, and they used to have a rodeo where they would use all the snowplow equipment in the summer, and we'd get a chance to see just how difficult it is to drive some of the equipment that they're out driving right now, not only in my county, but in all of our counties across the state of Wisconsin. So first off, thanks not just to each of you, but particularly to the men and women you represent on the crews that are out across the state at times like this. We appreciate that. I'm always pleased. I was particularly pleased when I was a county official, but I continue to be pleased as governor because I routinely hear people say that they notice the difference when they come in the state of Wisconsin on snowy days like today, that they, whether it's coming across the St. Croix River or the Mississippi or coming up over the Illinois state line, they can see the difference when they come into the state of Wisconsin. So we appreciate all the crews in our counties all across this great state who help make that possible. I've got a son who this year, he's a senior, but he's out this semester in Washington, D.C. working for Paul Ryan. And it was funny, a week ago on the Thursday and Friday before their big snow, they had already shut down all the government buildings, and for a week plus, I think they shut the schools down. And for a kid that grew up in Wisconsin, he's like, "What are they doing, shutting things down even before the snow came in?" He sent me a picture, and I know a lot of people saw these different pictures they took in the day or two before the big snowstorm. Although they, admittedly, in the end, actually had a pretty good sized one, not just for Washington, but overall. But even in the day or two before, he sent me a picture at the grocery store, and all the shelves were gone. They were cleared. All the stuff was gone. The food was gone. You'd think they thought they were going to be snowed in for a month or something like that. I had to laugh. A friend of mine saw one of those pictures, and he said, "Quiz." The picture of the shelves empty. He said, "Quiz, is this a picture of the grocery stores in Washington, D.C. before the snow, or is it a picture of the trophy case at the Minnesota Vikings' new stadium?" I got one or two Viking fans. Sorry about that. My wife always says, "Don't laugh. It just encourages me." But I said, for a while, for any of those near the UP, I used to laugh. They gotten a little bit better, although this year they kind of went back in the form. I used to joke about the Lions, that they didn't have a website because they couldn't put 3 W's in a row. So that was, yeah. That's a groaner. It just gets better as you think about it, right? But it's great to be back here. I know a couple years ago, before our budget, we talked, and you're right about the team, and we appreciate you and the board leadership and all the leaders here. Mark and his team in our office quite a bit, talking with, whether it's me or with Rich Zipper, our chief of staff, or others, as well as members of our cabinet. I know a few years ago, looking out here, saw a number of your faces when we spoke and talked about our commitment to putting more resources into mental health services. I was pleased with that and pleased we've been able to sustain that. In fact, sometimes it's so shocking to say that we put more money into mental health services than any governor in the last 25 years, and that's such an interesting statement that the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel actually PolitiFact me on that, and I got a true, so it's good, but it's really because of a partnership with all of you, and again, it goes back to my time at the county level, just knowing the challenges, and knowing that it's not just the challenge in terms of the resources, but for many of the people who work with you in Health and Human Services, that's a challenge even breaking the stigma when it comes to people successfully getting access to mental health services. That, we tell our friends, our coworkers, or neighbors, if their back's sore, go see the doctor. But if they're suffering from maybe early stage depression or something like that, everybody kind of backs away from them, even though both can be treated very successfully by seeing a healthcare professional. And so we appreciate partnerships like that with the counties to make sure that not just in certain areas, but in every part of the state, we're covered in that regard. We appreciate a lot of the other partnerships. We've been pleased, particularly when it comes to transportation. A few years ago, I think it was the 2013 through 15 budget, we put a 4% increase in terms of general transportation aids. Again, thinking about days like today with the weather, and thankfully we haven't had a huge amount compared to some years in terms of salt and crews being out, but nonetheless, whether it's in the winter or the work that needs to be done throughout the warmer months, we appreciate the partnership there, and included in that budget a 4% increase. We sustained that even with the challenges we faced this last budget, and we'll look to continue to sustain our partnership with the counties in transportation and infrastructure and other related issues. No, it's not just about roads and bridges, but we work with a number of you here on other issues related to economic development in your counties as it regards to transportation, be it a freight rail, number of initiatives that we worked hand in hand with county leadership on, as well as our airports and ports and other things that tie in along the way. And so we're looking for all sorts of opportunities to continue to grow it. Counties have been great partners in that regard. I think about 2 weeks ago, we gave our State of the State address, and we said the state of the state is strong. But I also didn't have a mission accomplished banner behind me either, because there's still a whole lot more work to be done. But I think of, just the report that we give, and I see, again, friends from all over the place, but I see my friend Jim Cruiser here from Kenosha County, and I think just Kenosha is a prime example. I literally had somebody the other day who told me every time they come over the border, they see all sorts of new development. And I always I'd love to come to any of your counties to break ground or cut ribbons. Jim's been kind of, hoarding me down there a little bit, but I think it's been just in the last couple of years, almost 4,000 plus jobs. When you think of everything from a gigantic Amazon center that was supposed to be about 1 million square feet, it's at about 1.5 million. It's supposed to be about 1,200 jobs. It's over 2,000. But there are companies like that they're looking at where they can be and looking at various places, and they're seeing that the climate here in Wisconsin, because of our partnership, not just because it's Wisconsin, but with state, county, municipal, regional economic development efforts working together, that there really are some tremendous opportunities. We've been doing, and I'm going to touch on this in a moment, but some listening sessions around the state already, and a number of county officials. Was just over the other day with county board chair and a couple of supervisors, as well as some town and other officials, and a whole broad spectrum of people that joined our listening session 2 days ago. And it's interesting talking about that around the state, but we start these sessions before we talk about where we want to be 20 years from now. We spend about the first 15 minutes out of an hour and a half plus talking about what we like about Wisconsin. I have a big old whiteboard sheet up there, and I say, just randomly tell me all the things you like. And I think sometimes that's important, not just in listening sessions, but as we go to events and conferences like this, we tend to hone in, and rightfully so, on the challenges that we face and how to fix those things. But sometimes we take it for granted in county and state government, but in life in general, in business, in our homes, we take it for granted that there's some pretty amazing things here in our states and in our counties respectively. That when you think about the quality of the people, when you think about, even though we'll talk about challenges with transportation, we're still blessed, even in some of our most rural areas, to have, whether it's county trunk roads or town roads or other infrastructure, unlike other places around the Midwest and around the country. We're blessed when you think about some of the service we provide and the attractions that we have in various sized communities. You look at all the wonderful assets. And so I'm always pleased to start out those sessions by just having people rattle those off. And then we, after that, talk about where do we want to be 20 years from now, and what are the measures we should have in terms of how do we measure that kind of success and getting to those points. But it's true here in the state, even in this last year. When you think about it, sometimes there's a story here, a story there about a challenge that we face, and we sometimes overlook the good news that's happened. This next month, March of 2016, we'll reach the mark where it's been 15 years since we've seen the last couple months the low level of unemployment that we've seen. We've hovered between 4.2 and 4.3% unemployment the last couple years. The last time we were that low was March of 2001. Now, so most of us here, 2001 doesn't seem that long ago. I've got 2 boys in college, a junior and a senior, and when I think back for them, what were they doing in March of 2001? They were 5 and 6 years old. So that's a lifetime ago for them. And when you look at the U.S. Department of Labor collects information about people employed in our state and employment and unemployment, you look at a couple of their factors last year. Last year had more people working in this state than at any time in the last 20 years. You don't read that much in the paper out there, do you? But it's an incredible statistic out there. And then when you look at not just low unemployment, high number of people working, but you look at the total percentage of adults working in this state, what economists commonly call the labor force participation rate, it is 68% in this state. More than 2/3 of our people working. That puts us in the top 10 best states in the country. And that's really important because I know visiting with a lot of you back when I was a county executive, when I was a county official back in 2010, we were barely treading water from an economic standpoint. We had in January of 2010, 9.2% unemployment. In the 4 years before we took office, we had lost 133,000 jobs in this state. We were facing some pretty difficult times, and those weren't just statistics. What I found when I traveled around the state in each of your counties were when you have 133,000 people losing their jobs over that 4-year period, those aren't just jobs, those are real people with real families that affect real communities and counties all across the state, not just employees, but real families. And so we've seen a dramatic shift. The challenge now for us is where it once was about jobs, 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 now it's about how to fill those jobs, jobs, jobs. And I think the number one issue, you probably find that with employers in your area, whether it be businesses, nonprofits, or otherwise, the number one thing we hear from employers across the state is, I have jobs open, but where do I find the people with the skills needed to fill those jobs? And obviously it's in important areas like manufacturing, that's a given. I hear about needs for welders and machinists and fabricators and tool and die and others all the time, but it's in information technology. It's in healthcare. It's in finance and accounting. It's in construction. It's in transportation. It certainly varies by parts of the state. It's in certain elements related to agriculture and agribusiness. It varies from one region to the other, but the constant trend is that employers are increasingly telling us that they need more skilled workers. And so I've realized, as many of you probably have as well, this isn't just about workforce development or career development. It's really about economic development. Because if you've got a manufacturer that's got 4 positions open for highly skilled welders, and if they can't fill those soon, they're not going to take on the additional work that would allow them to hire 5 or 6 more. Because probably a lot of you, maybe yourselves, have your own business. You know if you can't fill the spots you have open, you don't dare take on a whole new bunch of new clients or customers or business, because if you can't fill what you need right now in terms of staffing, the idea of taking on more to take up the additional load for new business is kind of frightening if you don't have confidence you can fill those positions. And so we put an aggressive shift, not just of late, but the last couple of years, but we're trying to hunker down on it even more. In the past 2 years, we've put over $100 million more in the workforce development. We're going to continue to do that going forward, but we got to start even earlier. And so we've been touring a number of our schools the last few weeks across the state to focus in on things like this fall. We start with a pilot in a number of school districts in this state to do academic and career plans to start as early as 6th grade. In the subsequent school years and beyond, it'll be all of our school districts will have the funding from the state to do that, to help young people start to realize, what am I good at, what am I interested in, what kind of careers are available out there, to start in not just in high school, not just 6 months out from graduation, but start thinking in junior high and high school, what sort of courses can I take to get myself ready for that kind of career out there. It means then in high school doing more dual enrollment. I've been around, again, the last few weeks visiting with our technical colleges, our outstanding 16 different technical college campuses across the state, and in many cases visiting with high school students who were there as part of our announcement on dual enrollment. We've shifted more resources from Wisconsin Fast Forward to put an even greater emphasis on helping our 424 school districts either start up new dual enrollment programs or in many cases expanding the ones that they have. Because when I meet a lot of these students, one of the great things out there is they'll tell me, I've got 12, 15, 20 or more credits. Well, that gives them a jump start in their career and on college, whether they want to go get an associate degree at a technical college or an undergraduate degree at one of our University of Wisconsin system campuses or one of our excellent private colleges and universities in the state. You want to talk about student loan debt? We talk about that a lot in this state and in this country. The best way to keep student loan debt manageable is to keep the cost down in the first place. And if you can give a young person a head start of a semester or even a year off of having to pay for that, I don't care what the interest rate is. People in the Capitol here talk all the time about whether we should refinance interest rates and things like that. But whether it's 6 or it's 4 or it's 2 or it's 0% interest, if you owe $75,000 on your student loan debt, I don't care if you pay no interest, that's going to take you a heck of a long time to pay off. Why not keep the cost down in the first place? In this case, not only helping keep costs manageable, but getting our young people prepared sooner. Sooner so they get that degree sooner, so they get in the workforce sooner. They get ready going forward, whether it's at an associate degree program in our technical colleges, whether it's at an undergraduate degree, or for some of our students, whether it's at a successful apprenticeship program. In the past 4 years, youth apprenticeships have more than doubled in this state. Adult apprenticeships are up 30%. some of our key areas across the state, key careers. I don't say jobs anymore, I say careers. Because what our young people are looking for are careers, not just a job, not just a paycheck, but a career, a fulfilling career out there. And we've got great opportunities. But we need to explore it and promote as many as possible. 2 weeks ago, I spoke at the education conference where all the school board members and administrators from the state were there, and I asked for their help, and I would ask for your help as well, even though you're not, although some of you may also be on school boards, because a lot of people around the state, I'm always amazed as to how many hats some of our great local officials wear, particularly in some of our smaller communities. But certainly something I ask of our school leaders, but I would ask of all our leaders, we need help in promoting the fact that there are multiple career choices out there, and we need to celebrate and lift each of those up. One of the things I get so frustrated of hearing people talk about how not just our young people, but sometimes our guidance counselors and our parents and our grandparents and others think that a young person who chooses to go off to an associate degree program somehow it's not as exciting or to be celebrated as much as another son or daughter who goes off to an undergraduate degree program. Now, I'm fine with 4-year degrees or graduate level degrees. That's great. We need people in those professions as well. But we certainly shouldn't be looking down at someone who goes to get an associate degree at one of our outstanding technical colleges here in the state of Wisconsin. Because as I often point out to our young folks, if you're a highly skilled welder, you put in a little overtime, it's not that hard to imagine making close to $100,000 a year. That's pretty good money. And it's a pretty amazing skill out there. And increasingly our factories and our sites and others across the state, they're not what we thought of when we thought of our parents and grandparents. They have changed dramatically. They require a whole lot more. And there are very few positions in our state that people can just walk out of high school without any additional training into. But they don't all require an undergraduate or graduate level degree to get into. There are great careers that span the spectrum. We just need to be supportive of all the different options out there. And again, you can help us as leaders in your community, even if you're not working directly in the schools. And so we're going to work in that regard. We know there's a lot of partnerships. We know that we can help everyone who wants a job find a job in this state. One of the areas where you do help us out in, where there's a connection in terms of health and human services aspect, is we've made some changes in this state in terms of, and part of it really ties into this workforce issue. Because it's not just about young people getting ready. It's not just about people looking for career changes, getting ready. All that's important. But we're at a point where when you have 68% of your population working, one of the highest levels in the country, and you've got employers still looking to hire more people, we can't afford to have anybody on the sidelines. So we've done a series of things that where you can help us in partnership. I'm proud to say that the last 2 years, we've dramatically reduced the unemployment rate for veterans in our state. In fact, we have one of the lowest unemployment rates for veterans of any state in the country. Now, that's a partnership. That's not just the focus that our Department of Veterans Affairs and our Department of Workforce Development and our Department of Military Affairs to the Guard have focused in, and they really have, but it's working with your county veteran service officers. And by the way, I want to be clear. I support county veteran service officers. I had one for 8 years. I know how important they are. And I also know, though, how important it is to have a partnership. And so I know many of you have CVOs who work very well with not only the feds, with the VA, but with the state and with other entities. And that's great, because that's really one of the blessings we had when I was county executive. We had a CVO on the grounds out in Zablocki that worked with the feds, that worked with the VA, worked with certainly the county officials, but also worked with state officials. I would encourage you, most of you probably have that, but for those that maybe don't have a county veteran service officer working in hand with other entities, push them on that, push him or her on that, because the best way to serve our veterans is in collaboration. And so I'm pleased that we have an unemployment rate that has dropped dramatically. It's one of the lowest for veterans of any state in the country. But as I told my team, I'm not satisfied until every veteran, particularly every one of our veterans who's returned recently from being deployed, at a minimum, they deserve the honor and the respect of having a job available for them somewhere here in the state of Wisconsin if they've done us the good fortune of defending our freedoms while being deployed somewhere around the world. And so while the rate's down and it's good and the numbers are significant, again, our focus is 100% employment for those who want it. So you can help us out with that, again, with partnering with your CVOs and the state and other entities coming together. Another area is, again, we work with many of you with family care and other services. Certainly it's part of, I know, one of your legislative initiatives that ties into transportation. We changed the name. It's now Seniors and Individuals with Disabilities Specialized Transportation. That went up on top of the general transportation aids from the past, but beyond just transportation services, we know when it comes to family care and other partnerships how important, and it was good to be in Rock County the other day talking about family care as well, but how important it is to serve not only our seniors, but individuals with disabilities in our counties and across the state. Again, this is an area where you can help us out as well. We started an initiative a few years ago called A Better Bottom Line. And the idea was for those that are able and interested, obviously there's some people with both physical and intellectual disabilities that are not fully capable of being fully employed, but for those who are able and interested, whether it's full or part-time employment, we put out an aggressive effort to help our employers across the state recognize the unique abilities that people with disabilities have and can offer to their organizations and to their workforce. And so we've dramatically expanded the number of slots that we have in things like Project Search, which helps high school age people with disabilities get a year-long internship. We've expanded it in different places around the state. What piqued my interest in this was the first year I was governor. I was not too far over here at the UW and the VA hospital here in Madison. Were one of the first to have Project Search interns. And I met a young woman on one of my tours there just months into being governor, a young woman who had acute autism, who would have been challenged sometimes in some other workplaces, but in this case at this hospital, she was assigned to be working in the area where they sterilize surgical equipment. Now, this is a good example where when I ask people to think about hiring more people with disabilities, it's not about charity. We're not asking people to do it based on charity. We're asking people to look for unique abilities that they have and not ignore, but recognize that just because they have a disability or defined as having a disability doesn't mean they can't fit the needs of a given workplace. And this young woman is a prime example, because with her acute autism, what does she need? She needs repetition. She needs things that are the same or similar over and over again. Well, somebody sterilizing surgical equipment, that's a job where a hospital needs somebody who does it exactly right every time, all the time. So what others might define as a disability actually became a strength for her. It actually made her probably more qualified for that position than just about anybody else who could have applied to do that. And that, again, is one of those things, not just through Project Search, but through the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, which had a dramatic increase, one of the best increases we've had in about a decade and a half in terms of helping people with disabilities go through their work plans and be placed into gainful employment. We can put more people into the workforce. And again, it's not only a benefit for them, it's not only a benefit for all of us as taxpayers, it's a benefit because so many of our employers are begging for qualified employees. One of the things that interested me in this concept to begin with, in addition to Project Search, was a few years ago, my friend, Governor Jack Markell from Delaware, a good example how you can work together. Jack's a Democrat, I'm a Republican, but we're good friends, and he was pushing for the National Governors Association for this Better Bottom Line initiative nationally, and one of the people he brought in was the CEO of Walgreens. And the CEO of Walgreens nationally showed us how one of his VPs had a son with a disability, and so his eyes were already open to the potential here, and they focused on one of their distribution centers, and in the end they hired more than half of the people at that distribution center were people with disabilities. When they got over 50%, their productivity eventually went up 120%. Defies what people would think, in terms of conventional wisdom. But what they found is, as long as they made an appropriate accommodation, either for a physical or an intellectual disability, that once that accommodation was made, not only could people do the job, but they were some of the most loyal, hardworking, dedicated employees because they were so thankful. As I visited, I found that to be true with employers that we've gone to highlight around this state who have done similar things, just not in maybe as grand a scale. And they tell me constantly that they're some of the best employees, that they up their morale, that they get everybody else jazzed up, that they're focused and dedicated and always on time and ahead of the game. And so, again, this is an area where both from a social service standpoint, but also as employers and opinion leaders, you can help us out. And then the other big area of late where we've just started, we started down in a couple counties in southeastern Wisconsin with a pilot. We've now done it statewide, and that it was when it comes to public assistance, particularly with food stamps. And there's been some confusion here in the Capitol, because early on we talked about this. There were some who said, oh, they're going to make it harder to get government assistance. I said, no, our goal is to make it easier to get a job. Because you see, now, I'm proud to say the state of Wisconsin says if you're an adult and you don't have any children in the home and you want to get food stamps, we expect that you're enrolled in one of our job training programs, because we know with the volume of jobs out there today, we can help find that person a job, a career, an opportunity to advance themselves, but they in turn have to be enrolled and constantly enrolled in our job training programs. Now, you know, again, there are some in the Capitol initially said, well, you're taking something away from somebody. I disagree. I think we're giving something back to someone. I grew up down in Walworth County, small little town called Delavan, back more than 30 years ago. Remember, my first job was right on the county line between Rock and Walworth County, a little restaurant called the Countryside Restaurant. First job was working for the Driscolls. I was a dishwasher. And then later, a couple years later, I moved up and I became the guy flipping burgers in the back at McDonald's in Delavan. I mean, for me, that's where I learned the dignity that comes from work. The benefit, the self-satisfaction of not just a paycheck, but of understanding what it means to work. Now, actually, a funny story, you get a kick out of this. So some of you may know this, but Paul Ryan and I are about the same age. We grew up about 15, 20 miles down the road from each other. During the 80s, I was working at that small little McDonald's in Delavan. Paul was working at the McDonald's in Janesville. The only difference is his manager told him he had to literally flip hamburgers in the back because he didn't have the interpersonal skills to work the front cash register. I was thinking about that a couple weeks ago when he was sitting behind the president, thinking, what was that manager thinking? You know, thinking, wow, did I make a mistake there? But I think for Paul and I, and now I think over the years, my kids are in college, but, you know, their first job, one was, you know, putting in custard at Gilly's Custard in Wauwatosa down the way from our house. The other worked at a pizza place throughout high school. Sometimes my friend said, why do you make your kids work? I said, it's not just for the money, although it doesn't hurt. It's really for understanding what it means for the dignity of work. There's a dignity in work. It's not just, I mean, I tell my kids all the time, the key to life is finding something you love and figuring out a way to get paid for it. You know, figure out a way to make a living, to at least get by, to support yourself and your family. But it's not the size of your paycheck. It's being fulfilled in what you do. And so there's a dignity that comes from work. And so what we're trying to do and it's why the other night I introduced a number of people, a number of young people in particular, who this past year have been beneficiaries of this change. And to hear their stories and to talk to them, in some cases, to hear their stories, it's just exciting because you realize one woman in particular, she not only got a job, you know, she went initially, got in our program, immediately was working as a housekeeper, and then moved up, not in short order after that, to working in a mill nearby her community. But along the way, when she was going to one of the job club meetings that she was a part of, she found out about some grants that were available for one of our technical colleges, and she signed up and got plugged in to be trained as a certified nursing assistant. And what she told us was, it wasn't just that she was thankful she got a job, she was thankful that people actually believed in her, that said, we expect that with a little bit of training, you can learn, you can get the skills, you can advance. And she said she hadn't had that before. That people, unfortunately, had told her she wasn't going to succeed, that she couldn't get things done. And we turned it around. We said, no, we know you can. We know there are opportunities out there. We know you can do it. But this is our expectation. If you want our help in the short term, we are good, decent people in this state. We will help people out in times of need. But in return, we expect that people are going to do something, if they're able, to advance themselves to the next step. That's just the fundamental dignity that comes from work. And so we appreciate the partnership because we don't do it alone. It's obviously done in conjunction with folks that we work with at the county level in particular in terms of social services. And so in all these areas, whether it's with people seeking, hopefully in many cases, temporary assistance from the state and working with the county, maybe it's our returning veterans, maybe it's people with developmental or intellectual or physical disabilities, in all these different areas, we know that we can help everyone who wants a job or wants a career find that job and find that career. But it's going to take working together. And that's really why we're doing, and I invite you to participate. We'll be calling out. We try in each area to call out to our county and our other local leaders when we come in town to do one of our listening sessions. Some people ask, why don't we do, have hundreds and hundreds of people at a town hall meeting as opposed to a listening session? And I think many of you can appreciate this, particularly many of you who've testified at legislative hearings before, is we realized if we're looking at long-term planning, we want to have a discussion, not just to have a shouting match and actually have people dialogue. Because usually if you have big hearings, people get a minute or two to talk, and that's about it. Instead, at our sessions, we spend an hour and a half, and people talk, and I listen. They don't just talk to me. They talk to their friends, their neighbors, folks within that region. And it's really about thinking, as many of you have done for your counties and for your regions, if we're going to look out 20 years and say what kind of a state, what kind of a county, what kind of region, what kind of a community we want to have, I think it's important to get as many voices as possible. So we've spanned the spectrum from people who agree with me politically to those who don't. We've had people who are young and old. We've had people who live in cities and suburbs and small towns. We've had every possible occupation you can imagine, from parents to retirees to veterans to people who own their own small businesses to people who work in factories to teachers to union leaders to you name it. We've had it. And we expect to do more of that in the future. And like I said, when we come in your area, we'll let you know as a county official. We've had a number the last couple times. And not only have they given us good comments, but I think afterwards we do an exit survey as well. The feedback we've gotten from our county and other local officials is they not only appreciate the chance to speak out, but they appreciate the chance to hear others within their communities talk about their hopes and their dreams and their aspirations and their concerns. More often than not, and I would imagine all of you are in the same boat as it would be for me, not just for ourselves, but really for our children and our grandchildren. Where do we want it to be for them 20 years out? And I think organizations, be they government, business, nonprofits, or otherwise, that are successful, try to have those sorts of long-term views, because we know decisions we make over the next couple of years will either help us get closer or further away from those goals, depending on how we work together. So we view the counties as a partner, not just because, as I know from the past, state statute in a way makes you an arm of state government in terms of many of the services we provide, but more importantly in our administration, and I think with the legislature and both political parties, we view you as a partner, not only in social services and infrastructure, but certainly in economic development and other projects going forward. And I appreciate the chance to come by and talk here. Safe travels. Although I know with our county crews across the state, you're going to have great pathways home along the way. Thanks for being here. Good luck.
Ladies and gentlemen, Governor Scott Walker, when he had indicated our unemployment rate went down and lowest since 2001, and what were we doing in 2001, and he thought about his two sons, 5 and 6, and think about what you were doing, I did think about that. In 2001, when the governor's sons were 5 and 6, we both happened to be out of town at an event. My son was babysitting Governor Walker's two sons while he and Tonette and my wife Connie and I went out to dinner. That was quite a few years ago. Thank you very much, Governor. Thank you very, very much. We're going to, a couple of quick announcements. One, again, we could not put on this event without the support of our sponsors. One of our sponsors, Crivello Carlson of today's breakfast, helping the County Mutual defend many of you in with our insurance company, the Wisconsin County Mutual Insurance Corporation, Crivello Carlson. Also, Enbridge Energy, moving energy from where it is discovered to where it is needed for use, Enbridge Energy. And lastly, is Cheryl here? Where is she? Okay. We couldn't put this on as an association without a point person, somebody in charge, and it's not me. So it is Cheryl Fleck. And Cheryl, thank you very much for making this happen. All right, it is 10 o'clock. We'll take a 10-minute break until 10:10. And then we're going to hear about what the future of county government is going to look like. So 10:10, 10 minutes, we'll get back together. Thank you.
town board meeting, you know, when I was up there. And, yeah, I thought it would be a good idea, too. It's not gonna be a huge amount. Yeah, yeah. Well, I ran it before.
So are you okay? You know what you're doing? Oh, jeez. Oh, this is a little bit of time.
Yeah, I know.
I know, I thought that right away.
Just various people around it have heard that back from me. He seemed to forgot about this Marquez. Good for today. Yeah. He has actually the real connections that he got. All his friends. He had two uncles. Jerry Grassi. Governor of Iowa has been in the village of Frederick more times than any governor. And the only sitting president that's ever visited Red in Polk County was Calvin Phillips in 1823. A private trout fishing place up in Lewis, Wisconsin. Little tiny unincorporated town. They paved Main Street of Lewis. Lewis is now a town. Wow. And they've got pictures of the most businesses. Everybody put up all the branding and all that kind of stuff. It was just great. It's the only sitting president except in Polk County.
You just need to create more news up there.
Well, yeah, we have every time we get the Twin City newspaper over there. If I'm driving the cities and I see a satellite truck, they need to stay in we just had a trial.
How are the roads?
Interstate Park, which is Minnesota, two groups of people, 100 yards across the river. Get into an argument. It's on for 4 hours. People in Minnesota say, come over and get into a confrontation with people in Wisconsin. So you're going to have to die. The guy was acquitted on all charges. That didn't go over real big. That was the attorney. I think the people should be that had a 10-day trial. And Twin City News, 3 channels did every news thing. It was actually, when we looked at it, really good tourist dollars coming. They were standing in the hotels. You know, they were, especially the tourists, they could come out any time, so they were there all the time. So they used to do a lot more. Yeah. That's the media section. We have a big tornado upstairs. That was in June. They had a big 4th of July. They managed to
All right, ladies and gentlemen, if we could take our seats, we'll begin. If I could ask my colleagues to, in the hallway, gather our guests back in. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I was talking with some folks during the break, and what we've concluded, or what you have concluded, I suppose, is we have had over the past couple of days a star-studded lineup of high intellect, energy, and passion. And I think that's a real credit to the membership of the Wisconsin Counties Association, all of you who have come to this event, that these individuals, with all of their knowledge and passion, have come to you to share that. And that goes on with our next speaker. Some of you have had the opportunity, the pleasure, really the privilege, to hear Mr. Dana Fry talk in the past, a man of worldly knowledge, a man of future vision, a man of immense skill. And he has taken some time out of his life today to share what the future of county government might look like. We are really lucky in this state that he is one of us, Polk County. Would you please join me in welcoming Mr. Dana Fry?
Thank you. Thank you. I warned Mark, I said the best way to exceed expectations is to manage them downward. So this is really going to stink. Okay, let me get started. I know we're running a little late in terms of time. First of all, I'm going to predict what will happen, and then if you look me up in 10, 20 years, I'll explain why it didn't. You know, you read a lot of things in newspapers, articles, magazines, online, and they talk about the future of government and local government being terrible. You know, crippled public agencies, fiscal crises, local bankruptcy, fiscal stress for counties, cities, and towns across the country. It's easy to find that. What's harder to find is positive outlooks, rosier outlooks in terms of what is happening, what's developing, where the future lies. I think the truth is actually somewhere in between. You know, there are challenges, and I'll talk about those today. There are opportunities. There are a lot of opportunities. And I think what I will discuss with you is that what we've known from history, what trends we see, what forces we see, are going to be beneficial to county government for the very long term. There are 4 factors that I think are going to shape the future of county government. First is decentralization. By decentralization, I mean devolution of power. Second is accelerating technology. You don't have to look very far to see the evidence in all of that. I mean, I'm standing here with the remote controlling that machine who's controlling this machine over here. 20 years ago, that's impossible. That was totally impossible. Problems seem to be becoming increasingly complex, not as amenable to some of the simpler solutions that we've grown accustomed to over all of the years. And then finally, we're doing all of this in an environment of strictly limited resources. So I'll talk a little bit about how these factors have developed, evolved, what they mean, and how they're shaping future direction of county government as I see it. Decentralization really comes from 2 very simple causes. One is people want services. They need services. They demand services from government. 2, they also demand a say in how those services are provided. From those 2 simple forces, a whole movement towards decentralization has developed, evolved, and continues to evolve. What kind of services? Well, here's a list. Establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, secure the blessings of liberty. That's the preamble to the Constitution. You know, and one thing that's not uncommon for the United States, countries throughout the world say similar things. They have similar causes, similar sources. This is a mission statement for government. This is why government exists. What do they mean specifically by that? There's the social functions of government. To ensure domestic tranquility. I just love that statement, don't you? Ensure domestic tranquility. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Without central government, the reverse from Thomas Hobbes' The Leviathan, the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Establish justice, and I put afterwards, and the rule of law. You get accountability under the law for the government and for individuals. Uniform, clear, and even enforcement of the law. You know, we take that for granted in the United States very much. We think about it, we don't, you know, people follow the law pretty much. We still need a sheriff, we still need a correctional facility, courts, and so on. But if you've ever lived or worked in a country that doesn't follow the rule of law, you begin to appreciate the importance. I lived in a country for several years where it was far cheaper for a debtor to bribe a judge to cancel the debt than it was to pay the debt off. What do you think that does to your credit market? Destroys it, devastating. There's a lot of cases, a lot of places where people are just above the law. That's not that uncommon in developing countries. Some countries get special license plates if you're at a certain level. A policeman will not stop you for any reason whatsoever if you have one of those special license plates. So it's something to appreciate, the fact that this country has a level of rule of law that a lot of other countries, especially developing countries, can only dream about getting someday. Promoting the general welfare. Well, welfare is a really meaningful term for economists. It means the well-being of society. One of the reasons why government is engaged in this is because in a capitalist economy, markets sometimes fail. They don't work. You know, they don't provide what people want. Public goods like national defense. The classic example they use in graduate school is a lighthouse. Who would pay for a lighthouse? Once it's built, how would you get people to actually pay for it if it was a private company that built it? They provide things that people don't want. Air pollution is a great example. They can extort or damage monopolies or unfair competition. They can become unstable. Government has a role in stabilizing the economy and promoting the general welfare. About 75 years ago, an economist named Richard Musgrave came up with 3 economic functions of government. And a lot of what's discussed now and what's developed in public finance follows from those 3 economic functions. Macro stabilization. You're familiar with that. You work through the banking system, the financial system, and so on, to keep the economy growing, to keep unemployment low as you can, keep growth sustainable. Income stabilization, that's redistribution. You keep the poor from becoming too poor, in some cases by keeping the rich from becoming too rich. And finally, supply stabilization, and that's the area where we do the most in terms of allocating scarce resources, taking care of things, providing assistance, benefits, and so forth. Second major cause for the force behind decentralization is that people demand input. They want to be heard. They want to understand. They want to help make decisions that affect them. They want a voice sometimes. They want access, accountability, information. That's the second demand, or the second force behind decentralization. The third is who provides what service, what level of government. That is an honest-to-God org chart of a government agency, not in the U.S. I don't know how anyone could figure that one out. So what you have is you've got this need for services for a lot of reasons, why government does what it does, combined with demand for input on the part of citizens. Those merge together and create the force for, a bottom-up push for, decentralization of services. Decentralization is the same thing as local control. Very often in county government, local government is referred to local control. It means about the same thing. It's a real devolution of power. It brings services, decision on services closer to the people served and gives people a voice in government. You know, the most famous example is no taxation without representation. People want a voice. They want to be heard. The reason I've got the nested dolls there, they're called a matryoshka in Russian. This was the structure of government in the former Soviet Union. All the way on down, there were just smaller versions of the same ministries that existed at the national level. There was no devolution. There was no devolution of power. The model that it's called is deconcentration. Why decentralization? There's an economist named Wallace Oates who just died last fall, who about 40 years ago came up with the basic fundamental premise that local governments are more efficient. They're more efficient because they can provide only the services that citizens want and are willing to pay for. That can change from local government to local government. One county, people may place a very high value on transportation, on farm-to-market roads. Another county, their priority may be corrections. And another, it may be human services. As long as there's the discretion that you have as policymakers to say, okay, we will do more of this and do less of this, it becomes more efficient than a one-size-fits-all. As we get into it, and I'll talk about it, mandates interfere with that, as does rules, regulations, and so forth. They make government less efficient overall. They're also more democratic, closer to the citizens. You know, you all, I don't know how many people get a chance to talk to their congressperson or their senator. Not many. A lot of people have a chance to talk to their county board member. They're more responsive. You don't have to wait for news of a problem to filter up and filter up and filter up before you would take action or consider action. You can do so almost very, very quickly. You can respond much more quickly. And finally, more flexible to tailor services to meet local needs. Now, the World Bank refers to decentralization as absolutely key to economic development because local governments have the authority to tailor the kind of economic development package to people or to potential investors that the national government can't. It's worldwide. Decentralization isn't slowing anytime soon. It's continuing on. The former Soviet Union, as I mentioned, had no local governments. And I've worked on a couple of projects in the former Soviet Union to establish local governments. Eastern Europe, again, similar structures, very little local autonomy. That's now increased, that's now grown. If I get time, I'll talk about a specific example. But other countries in Africa, Asia, those are generally to improve effectiveness and efficiency, to make government work better, to meet the demands that citizens have for improved services and input on those services. There's also ethnic and social causes. You know, Scotland's potential succession from the UK, but the decentralization that has accompanied that has resulted from that, where Scotland has more authority over their own affairs. Belgium is, I don't know, about every year I read that this is going to be the last year for the full country of Belgium, that it's going to split into parts. Spain, you've got the Basque separatists, of course, the Basque region of Spain. You've also got now more Catalonia, Barcelona. This is what the World Bank says, is positively can affect political stability, public service performance, equity, and macroeconomic stability. Decentralization is a big deal, and it's a worldwide phenomenon. You know, I think when I first started in government about a century ago, the discussion of the pendulum swinging from centralization to decentralization, centralization to decentralization, it doesn't really swing. It doesn't really swing. What you have, and you see it in regionalization, is governments tend to regionalize because they can benefit from economies of scale. You can buy things cheaper because you're buying more of them. You can staff to meet regional peak loads instead of individual peak loads. You know, it's as if I'm thinking of an example, is if you had to have, I've seen it in human services and economic support, where you can have a county, if every county staffs to meet peak load, then in another county there may be slack resources. You can capture that through regionalization. So you staff for regional peak loads instead of for individual county peak loads. You also get uniformity of service provision. You want to make sure everybody gets the same service? Well, you centralize it. And so everybody does get the same service. That takes away the local variability. What happens is it reduces accountability. It also, again, I mentioned the efficiency of decentralization. It flies in the face of that. And it moves services further away from the citizens. For that reason, regionalization very often fails within not too long a period. I have never heard of a government, other than I suppose through a violent revolution, re-centralizing. It's always a movement in the form of decentralization. There's another principle I want to raise, and that's called subsidiarity. Subsidiarity basically is assignment of the responsibility for providing a service to the lowest level of government that can provide that service. In other words, if a service can be provided by a county, it's assigned to the county, not to the state. It's a fundamental feature in the European Charter on Local Self-Governance. And I don't know if many of you have heard of that. It's not just the traditional European nations that are signatories to that. There are 47 countries that have signed on to the European Charter of Local Self-Governance. That includes countries like Russia and Turkey, Ukraine. What it provides for is true home rule. Governments can make the decisions that affect their structure, their services, as long as it's not prohibited. Required consultation with local governments. A national government or at a state level government can't simply make changes in something that affects a local government without consulting with that local government. No unfunded mandates. No unfunded mandates. They're not allowed if you're a signatory. Assurance of stable revenues. Not only do they say your revenues have to be adequate to do what you need to do, they also have to be stable. They can't give you a revenue like, say, an income tax, assign a revenue like an income tax, for example, that goes up and down during recession. They have to give you a stable source of revenues. Full equalization of resources, and they take that a step further without any strings attached. In other words, poorer districts are able to fund the same basic level of services as our richer districts. There's full equalization of resources. And finally, grants without strings attached. One of the principles in the European Charter of Local Self-Governance is that if you offer a grant, you should not have conditions associated with it. Now, how refreshing would that be? So, how do we fit? Well, counties are decentralized. They're a decentralized institution of government. We've got an unusual dual role. We're both a local government, and we're also an agent of the higher level of government. And that goes way back to the original founding of counties, at least as we consider them, which is in England in the 10th century. We've always been an arm of the king or an arm of a higher level of government and an independent local government able to provide services itself. We're very close to the public. We've got a large enough tax base and cover a large enough land area so that we can provide fairly complex services, substantial programs. And I think something important to think about is in Wisconsin, everybody lives in a county. Everyone does. Not everyone lives in a city or a village or a town. Everybody lives in a county. Every business in the state is located in a county. Every road, every piece of infrastructure is in a county. So the county is probably the lowest level of government that can uniformly administer services at that level. Second factor changing counties is the technological revolution. There's a lot more information out there and a lot more demands for accountability, which I'll talk about in a minute. It used to be if you wanted a copy of the county budget, you had to get in your car, drive down to the courthouse or to the government center, go to the clerk's office, get it out, dig through it, maybe pay something to have some pages copied. Well, right now it's a click. It's a click. That information is available. Service delivery efficiencies, how quickly you can turn things around, and how much more quickly you'll be able to do that going into the future. You're going to have technology in all aspects of service delivery. You know, GPS and snowplows, for example. The city of Chicago has an app where you can pull it up and you can see where all the snowplows are in the city of Chicago after a snowstorm. See where every one of them is. Yep. Let's see, I'm maybe pointing in the wrong place. Or am I frozen? There we go. We've got increasingly complicated problems, as I mentioned before. These are water pipes in Flint, Michigan. Multiple levels of government and society. Infrastructure, and I'll mention that a little more in a bit. Economic development, child protection development, environment, family support. All of those kinds of problems are complicated, and they're going to require addressing by more than one level and more than one agency. They're not open to simple solutions. There's not a quick fix other than lots and lots of money, which isn't available. So they're going to require multiple agencies and take a long time to address. This one you know, we all know. State and federal governments have their own financial issues. Our revenues are pretty well fixed, and we're not going to get much more out of them. The system, the tax system in the United States is increasingly becoming obsolete as it moves away from the kinds of things that people buy. You know, we're a service industry, a service country, increasingly. Well, we don't tax services, really. We rely a lot on an individual income tax at the federal level. At the local level, it's a sales tax with a narrow base. We have property tax. We're limited there. It's limited, not only that, it's limited and it's shared between cities, villages, towns, counties, and school districts. That is, from an international development standpoint, that's a no-no. You don't do that. You assign, when you do what's called revenue assignment, you assign each level of government their own resources. It really makes a difficulty for accountability, for example. If your tax goes up, well, why? Well, you know, if you got a half an hour and we go down to the treasurer's office, I could probably figure it out for you. But I can't tell you off the top of my head. Consequence of all of this, I think, is there's going to be severe constraints for the foreseeable future in revenues. That just is what it is. When I started my career, shortly thereafter, California adopted Proposition 13. And doom and gloom, it's the end of the world. It's the end of local governments. Nothing is going to be done again. They're going to be shutting things down, shutting schools down. Well, it hasn't happened. We've all learned to adapt to an environment of constrained resources, and that's going to be something we're going to continue to do in the future. So we put those together. Decentralization, the force. Technology accelerating. Complex issues, all with fixed resources. And what does that mean? One is I see more demanded from county government rather than less. We're a balance between a regional and very local government. As I said before, in Wisconsin, everybody lives in a county. Large enough to provide crucial services, but you can still get the efficiency gains that you get from decentralization. People trust local governments. So what's going to happen from that is the force to decentralize is going to continue to place more demands on county governments. This is remarkable, absolutely remarkable. This goes back, this is a Gallup poll. Every year, well now every year, back when it was every couple of years, they ask people, do you have trust, how much do you trust your government at each level, and how much confidence do you have in handling problems that come up? Local governments have been flat at 70% for over 40 years. You can see what's happened to Congress. Has gone from about 70% to 32%. Even states have dropped from 70% to 58%, and that's as of 2015. Local governments enjoy a very strong position of trust. That's going to add to the demand that local governments provide more services. This evolution began years ago. It's a little hard to read, but the brown area, that's all other. The wedge, the blue-gray wedge that's up, that's spending on highways. Highways used to be about 20 cents out of every dollar. They're now down to 8 cents. What's happened is the all other has expanded. The all other includes things like corrections is a big piece of it. Court system. It includes health and health-related issues. Those all have expanded greatly since this is 1967, which is about as far back as is reasonable to go. This is a census of governments that's done by the U.S. Census Bureau every 5 years. The 2012 one isn't out yet in terms of the detail level. We're going to need different approaches for complex issues. There's a concept of government and governance. They're two very different things. Governance is identifying what citizens need, seeing to it that they receive those services. Government is just a tool to do so, one of many. There's going to be greater need to look at those other tools. You know, we all came back, a lot of us started in the day when government, especially county government, was the only game in town. There really wasn't much else out there. That's changed, and that's going to continue to change in terms of other institutions. So what happens is, if you look at what's called the policy cycle, that starts with identification of a problem, and then you come up with alternatives to address the problem, you decide whether to address it, and so on. There's another step in there. And the first one is, again, should the problem be addressed? But the second one is, who should address it? It's not going to be automatically assumed that this is something that government is going to respond to going forward. You know, these are some characteristics of good governance, and this is from the United Nations. We meet a lot of them. We meet a lot of them: participatory, rule of law, equitable and inclusive, effective and efficient, responsive. But this idea of governance and of developing good governance is something else that's spreading worldwide. What are the tools other than government? Well, there's nonprofits, such as what's called in other countries civil society. Includes things like churches, labor unions, anything outside of government other than the private sector. There's other governments or agencies in terms of collaboration and cooperation. The private sector, and I mentioned social impact bonds. That's something that's developed fairly recently, is where a company or an organization will come to a government and say, okay, you have this problem. This problem is, let's say, juvenile recidivism. All right? We will set up a program to reduce that. This is the amount by which we're going to reduce it, and if we succeed in doing so, then you pay us. If we don't, then we accept the risk. That's a social impact bond. Public-private partnerships, I'll mention those more in a minute. We're either going to partner, or lead or partner with other entities. Now, a case study, just very quickly, one that I hear about most nights, is my wife is actually just phasing out as the director of a domestic violence shelter in Polk County. And she talks about how they coordinate with all of the different agencies across the entire region. Government, state government, local government, yes, but nonprofits, other agencies, churches, and so on, to provide the network of services to victims of domestic violence. County government is a player, but in this case, a relatively small player. The big players are the nonprofits in this area. This is what's happened. This is in constant dollars, and I've done a little bit of smoothing because of the reporting timetable. In 1995 dollars, nonprofits collected about $15 billion. This is in 1995 dollars. That doubled in 20 years. The size of the nonprofit sector in real terms has doubled in 20 years. That's going to continue to grow. One reason is because of grants from higher levels of government. It's real quick to amp up a nonprofit. It doesn't take you very long. It's also very quick to wind down a nonprofit for a specific program or project. It's harder to do that with a government. It's much more difficult to do that with a government. The idea of public-private partnerships. You hear that all the time. It's a buzzword. It's been a buzzword around the world for 15, 20 years. Well, this is what the American Society of Civil Engineers says this country needs to invest by 2020. $3.6 trillion. That's probably a low number. The U.S. Conference of Mayors has estimated that to fix the nation's sewer and water systems over the next 20 years, it's somewhere between 2.6 and 4.8 trillion. Where's that money going to come from? It's not going to come from public funds. A lot of it is going to come from private sector and tapping private sector funds. That's what a public-private partnership does. Two simple examples. San Jose, California, they arranged a bunch of volunteers to maintain a rose garden that the city could no longer afford to maintain. That's a type of public-private partnership. Or in San Juan, Puerto Rico, they said, you build us a new airport. You get all the revenue from that airport until such time that you've gotten your money back out and your profit from it. So this is something we're going to be looking at, and I think increasingly, is how do we tap into private capital to get infrastructure projects done, for good or ill. We're going to see more demands for accountability, a lot more demands. You know, as we get more responsibility, we've got greater public ability to access information. They know where to go to find it. It's a mouse click now as opposed to driving down to the courthouse or to the government center. We're going to get with that greater demand for transparency and a greater demand for meaningful information, information that tells people something. That's going to come both from citizens and from higher levels of government. They're going to demand that accountability from us as well. How to do accountability. This is going to be a big buzzword over the next 10, 20, 30 years. One is you do evidence-based policy, and I'll say what I mean by that in a minute. Two, you have to measure and demonstrate value for money, that you're getting something for the tax dollars that people are sending. The ways to do that is program budgets with real outcome measures, so you see what you're buying. Costing government services, you see what it actually costs you. You know, an example is, how much does it cost to vaccinate a child? Do we know? Shouldn't we? What does that vaccination do? Is that actually preventing the spread of a disease, or is it not? Do we know? Shouldn't we? We're behind the rest of the world in a lot of this. Cost-benefit analysis for major programs. That's something also that's being increasingly required. Do the costs exceed the benefits? And the costs aren't just costs in a budget. They're costs to the economy. There's something that economists call a deadweight loss. Tax money isn't free. It isn't free. It reduces investment. It reduces economic activity. If you pull money out of the private sector, it does reduce money in the private sector, the money that they would make. So, you know, that's not good or bad. It just is. So when you're looking at a project, you should be able to make the assessment, is what we're doing worth it, even though that there is some loss to the economy? In most cases, yes. In most cases, yes, but that's something that needs to be known. And finally, integrating strategic planning and budgeting, looking longer than just a year ahead, looking 2, 3, 4, 5, and putting it in place so it's operationalized. Evidence-based. You know, I think you probably all heard about evidence. It really came out of medicine in the early 1990s. Let me check my time here. Oh, good. Maybe not so much for you. You know, and there was a research institute, and I believe it was in the UK, said, okay, why do doctors prescribe what they prescribe? Why do they do what they do? So they set out to go find out. And they went around and interviewed a lot of different doctors, and the doctors came back, and the researchers came back and were horrified. Doctors were recommending courses of treatment based on obsolete information from medical school, based on what somebody told them once upon a time, based on something that they'd tried themselves once and seemed to work, or based on what the last pharmaceutical salesman told them. They weren't going back and getting evidence. They weren't making the determination of what actually really works. What works? So the conclusion was, if we want to really improve medical treatment, we just got to get better information out to the docs. And that's where evidence-based medicine came from, evidence-based practice. Evidence policy dates from a little bit later. I mean, this isn't that old. You know, this is 20 years ago. There is the major article on evidence-based management, for example, is 15 years old, something like that. It's now common everywhere. Social work, policing, teaching, human resources, management, and on and on and on. The use of evidence, the understanding of evidence, and what to do. The UK, several years ago, founded what's called What Works centers. What Works centers go out and take a look at what is the evidence. Academic studies, studies from other government, how can they make the determination of what actually does work? They move that and they distill it into documents that are meaningful, that people can actually access and use, other governments, and this is aimed at governments themselves. They distribute it, and then they promote the use of evidence in policymaking. There are 6 of them right now. One is called crime reduction, local economic growth. I have a friend and colleague who worked for the Local Economic Growth Center. Better aging, early intervention, early childhood, education, and then what's called NICE, which is National Institute for Clinical and Health Excellence. And he tells me it isn't very nice. But these are the centers in the UK, and this is something that's been going on for quite a while there. We have a bit of an equivalent in the United States. The Washington State Institute for Public Policy, the legislature a few years ago, quite a few years ago now, directed them to do a cost-benefit analysis of every major program that's implemented by the state of Washington. They've since amended that to say also do a study on what evidence is available that this program actually works. Very interesting. This is too tiny to read probably, but the second one down, you remember Scared Straight, where they take kids and they lock them up or they bring them into prison. They did a study in May of 2015. The total benefits were a negative $9.8 million. That's the benefit. The cost you add on top of that, taxpayer cost, non-taxpayer cost, and so on, the whole program is a $10 million loss. It has no benefits. It doesn't work. They assign a 4% chance that the benefits will exceed the cost for that program. Other programs, they're much more positive. There's drug court. Drug court, they think there's a 58% chance that the benefits exceed the cost. So these kinds of questions are being asked and will be and need to be asked increasingly to show accountability. Why are you doing that? We're doing that because we have the evidence to show that it works. What works? Demonstrating value for money. This is a term that we haven't heard a lot of in the United States. We will, in different ways or forms. Is a program efficient? Does it turn money into outputs, dollars into vaccination efficiently? What are the costs? Is it effective? Do those vaccinations reduce the spread of childhood diseases? Is it cost effective? How much do you spend to prevent one case of a childhood disease? Taken together, that is demonstrating value for money. It's showing that money is well spent. To do that, you have to make major, major improvements in public financial management. Major improvements. There's an organization called PIFA, Public Expenditure and Financial Accountability, which is a bit of a mouthful. They're formed out of, in part, the World Bank, IMF, a few other countries. They go around and they assess how good a job governments are doing. And it's largely developing nations, but this is valid for everybody. How good a job are they doing in managing public money? The donors really want to know that. They really want to know if we give a country of Kyrgyzstan $100 million, is it going to be well managed? How do they manage their own money? How do they manage the money that we give them? How good are they at public financial management? Well, the first one is budget reliability. We're really pretty good at that. We're very good at that. You know, we spend pretty much what we say we're going to spend. And that's what budget reliability is. We typically don't spend more. Typically don't spend a heck of a lot less. But that's okay. Transparency of public finances, we're a little shakier there. Yeah, we produce reports. But do they mean anything to anybody? You know, how many do citizens' guides to the budget, for example, so people can actually see where the money goes so they can understand it? Pillar 3, management of assets and liabilities. We're quite good at that too. 4, policy-based fiscal strategy and budgeting. No. There's a grade that they assign to each one of these and the indicators within these. And the grade's from A to D. And frankly, I've done some assessments and I've worked with the PIFA framework. We wouldn't do well on that one. We would not do well on that one. That's one area we've got to get better. Predictability and control of budget execution, fine. Accounting and reporting, fine. External scrutiny and audit, fine. Excellent, as a matter of fact. But it's how we budget and how that works and how we link it to planning. You know, this is what the World Bank says about developing countries. This is true, I think, in every country. If you can't link your policy, what boards decide, what governments decide, with planning for the near term and how you're going to get there, and if that doesn't flow to the local budget, to the annual budget, then you're not actually doing anything. You know, governments throughout the world are full of these documents, these wonderful, in developing countries they call them like strategic development plan or sustainable development plan or something like that. Lots of pictures, really nicely done. Some donor came in and spent a whole bunch of money with consultants to put it together for them. It sits on a shelf. It's a shelf product. Then you may have agencies that do strategic plans and they give lip service to the higher level plans, but they don't link that into what they're actually going to do. And then finally, the annual budget just chugs along on its own based on what happened last year and what's going to happen the next year. So this is why this doesn't work well and needs to get better. Prioritization. There's not enough money to do everything, so how are you going to decide what to do? Well, it's going to be tough. You know, the usual answer is you just keep doing what you've always done. And you keep getting what you always got. Well, at some point, that's not good enough. We may have, and one economist has said, enter the era of takeaways, where the task for governments is going to be to take services away from people because we can't afford to give it to them anymore. I don't think that's necessarily true, but I think that there is a time to look harder at programs that don't work, that aren't effective or aren't efficient, and put services aimed at the citizens so the citizens can help decide what services that are provided. I mean, they're the ones that are paying for it. That's the purpose behind decentralization, is to give them a greater say. We have to maybe change the model of government, the vending machine model. You put money in, you get service back. You don't have a lot of choice in terms of what's in the machine, and if you don't like it, the only thing that you can do is kick the machine. There are other models. I teach a course in public administration. One of the books that I use it's called Citizenville. And it's written by Gavin Newsom, who is the Lieutenant Governor of California, former mayor of San Francisco. And the subtitle is Turning the Town Square Digital. How do you get information out to people? How do you engage people? The idea of a platform, that information is a national asset, that we release it and let the public run with it. Their mantra is no secret data, no secret data, release everything, release everything. One of my favorite quotes in the book was, they talk about, you're familiar with Adobe PDF files? PDF is where data goes to die. Very true, that you need to make it there in usable form. You've got a competitive model. In Australia, starting in the 1990s, government agencies compete with private providers to provide services. They very often win. They very often win. So you've harnessed that competition. Or again, you tailor services to what citizens want and when they want it. The idea now is government employees, as you advance, as the model changes, are going to become more knowledge workers and tons of flexibility and less clerical and less service provider, direct service provider. Final piece is, we've talked about bottom-up decentralization, it's top-down decentralization. Mandate reform has been a failure because the state hasn't seen it's in its interest. It's a failure everywhere. There was a joke told among Minnesota legislators, and this was 20 years ago, when county governments there were pushing very hard for mandate reform. Very hard. And it was, what's the difference, and this one legislator saying to another, what's the difference between having a dog and a local government lobbyist outside your door? The answer is, the dog stops whining when you let it in. Now, at the time, I was somebody that was involved in that, so I didn't take it personally. Reducing regulation for greater flexibility, that's a free one. That's almost free the state can do to assist local governments and help develop local governments. Australia used to have thick books for nursing home regulations. In the late 1980s, they replaced them with 31 principles to which nursing homes should ascribe. The goal went from a regulatory agency to an assisting agency. The quality of nursing home care improved. I think if many of you run nursing homes, if you look at the kind of regulations and the relative subjectivity to which these regulations can be interpreted, this isn't a good model. It doesn't work. I don't think it achieves the results that they want to achieve. Canadians have looked towards this idea of disentanglement in terms of mandate reform. They've sort of started, again, they have not done well, but it's more this long-term study in terms of who does what. And maybe there was some discussion of a worldwide charter on local self-governance. Maybe that's something that could be discussed and maybe should be discussed at the U.S. level. I'll do a quick case study, as I think, let's see how much I'm doing for time. I want to do something kind of good for both of us. I worked on a decentralization project in Bosnia. 1995, the Bosnian War ended. The country, its infrastructure was in an absolute shambles. It didn't have a government. It had a peace treaty, the Dayton Peace Accords, adopted in 1995. The Dayton Peace Accords, and I think most agree, it was a good peace treaty. It's a horrible constitution. That's what the electoral structure looks like in Bosnia. You've got the municipal level actually is closer to a county level. There are 143 county level governments in Bosnia. They're called Opština or Općina. They provide the similar services that the counties would provide in terms of the land area and so forth. They're governed by, actually they show there is a municipal assembly. There is a directly elected mayor in Bosnia. Huge breakthrough in terms of democracy, in terms of efficiency and so on of government. The canton level only exists in the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. That's the Muslim Croat part of the country. That's the canton level. They are useless, an absolutely useless level of government. The members, the country is split between the Serbian and you can see from right to left, between the Serbian, the Republika Srpska, that's the Serbian part of the country, and the Croat, Bosniak, or Muslim part of the country, that's the left part. The Serbian level of government doesn't have cantons. Okay, that was not part of the Dayton Peace Treaty, peace accord. So I was at a conference I actually was directing the project, and these guys are the equivalent of elected executives, elected county executives. One after the other got up, and the people from the Federation telling the people from the Serbian part, from Republika Srpska, if you want to destroy your government, adopt cantons. Fight them for all it's worth. They are useless level of government. Then you get to the Federation, the President, Vice President, and you've got, on the other side, you've got the House of Representatives parliamentary, you've got the overall presidency, which rotates every 3 years between the three ethnic groups. One level of government actually works. Only one level works, and that's the county level. They have built up, and that's because of the public support they've gotten, because donor recognition that, hey, they're going to actually provide services. They've gotten the funding, they've gotten the support that they've needed, they've been able to go ahead and develop a working local government. Now, the top levels are still completely dysfunctional, provide very little. What has happened is that these county level governments have stepped forward to do more and more. I had a conversation with an executive from one of the countries that would be in the Federation, or one of the counties in the Federation, and he said, you know, I was in my office and a group of citizens came in, and they said, we really need help with this housing issue. And he started to say, well, you know, that's a canton issue. And the leader of the group looked at him and he said, we know that. We're talking to you. Said, so what can you do? They took care of it. You know, and supposedly things like income maintenance, emergency assistance is at the canton level. Every single executive has a fund to cover things like that. County governments work, local governments work because they have to. They can come out of conditions of incredible adversity. They can be unifiers. They can bring people together. They can gain that public support. We did opinion surveys. What did people think of their governments? Well, you can imagine. You thought that looked bad in the U.S. as far as the federal level of government works. You ought to see it there. But it works. Local government works, and local government works because it has to, because people expect it to. And that's a worldwide phenomenon. And that's where the force for decentralization is coming. So I started out saying there are 4 factors: decentralization, technology, increased program complexity, and severely limited resources. That's going to have the consequences, as I see it, over the decades to come, of expanding the role of county government, of requiring at the same time collaborative solutions to problems, of working with civil society, with nonprofits in terms of a web of services. And I use the term sometimes as a mosaic. It's no longer just a single color, a single provider. There's a mosaic of agencies that do provide services and see the services are provided. A greater accountability and concomitant public financial management reform. We're going to be doing a lot over the next decades to really bring up. And I taught not that long ago in a country of fewer than 10,000 people. They run circles. around most governments in the United States in terms of the quality of their budget documentation, their budget preparation, their entire process. 10,000 people. Forcing priority, and in some cases service reductions, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because those service reductions with static resources can go for programs that do work well, and that are important. Changing the model of government, moving away from the sort of, if you want something from the government, you show up at the courthouse between 8:30 and 4:30, Monday through Friday, fill out some forms, and we'll get it to you. Well, that doesn't sell very well. These governments in Bosnia, all of them, everyone we worked with, developed what was called a citizen service center, which is a one-stop shop for local government. You need something from the government, you go to one place, and you get what you need, and that's virtually everything. That's virtually everything. And they all did that, and they all absolutely loved it. And finally, I think there's going to eventually be a restructuring of the state-county relationship. There has to be. As county demands on counties increase, as the importance of counties grows, and it will in terms of providing services, as public support behind counties maintains or increases from the level it is, there ought to be a restructuring of the state-county relationship. The state has to, at some point, decide and understand that it's in their own interest. It took the Europeans a while. This started right after World War II, and the European Charter wasn't adopted until 1985. But at that point, governments throughout Europe said, yeah, this is in our best interest to do that. It's our best interest to try to harness the efficiency that we can and the gains that we can through strong local government. So I talked about, and I do with my board, two concepts. One's called transition, and the other's called transformation. Where this came from was after the Soviet Union collapsed, the title given to all of these countries that were newly independent was they were a transition nation. Everybody knew where they were headed. They were headed for democratic capitalism. This was when Francis Fukuyama wrote the essay or book, The End of History, that we all know what the form of government and the form of economy is going to be. Well, about 15 years into it, they weren't going that way. So someone suggested that maybe they should call them transformation nations instead of transition. The difference between the two is with a transition, you know where you're going. You have an end in mind and you're headed towards that. You're acting. You're setting the direction. Transformation, someone else is acting. You know you're going to be different, you just don't know what. I think county governments can go into a transition, can start to understand what the future holds, what future direction is needed, and take active steps to get there, and to get there strong. I think I promised my board chair I'd put this up. I use this in a class. This is actually a question that I use in a final exam. I think I've covered a lot of it. But please explain the term evidence-based, citizen-centric, performance-driven, collaborative governance in 2 to 3 paragraphs. They all do. They all do. Anyway, thank you. If there's questions. Thank you. If there are any questions, otherwise, maybe get on the road a little faster, huh? Thanks. Oh, yeah, please.
Hi, I'm Willie Johnson Jr. from Milwaukee County. You talked about, you said we're not doing as great a job as we could as it relates to costing government services.
Right.
And I take that to mean that we have too much, sometimes, decentralization. And you talked about Bosnia and what Bosnia does. So what are the big differences with respect to what we do and these more efficient governments do?
Okay, they do full costing, and it isn't necessarily Bosnia in terms of costing. A lot of this came out of Australia, UK, other places. This tremendous drive for value for money is out of the UK. Everything that you do, if you propose something new to the UK government, you have to do what's called a 5-case business case model. One piece of it is costing. What is it going to cost you per unit of service, and then also per program? What countries like Bosnia that do program budgeting do better is they know how much it costs them to deliver a program, a specific set of activities aimed towards a common clientele usually. So they do that better. Costing is much more complicated. Costing is, it's used in the private sector that's called activity-based costing, or a new version is time-driven activity-based costing. So you can know exactly to the dollar how much it costs you to process a building permit. You can then identify what are the cost centers there, or exactly what it costs you to vaccinate a child. So where that is going is to measure efficiency, you have to know what your costs are. And very often we don't. I mean, it's a sad fact that most governments, or probably most governments, don't know exactly what they're buying because they don't know if they're getting the outcomes they want or what it truly costs, especially if you look at that in economic costs and factor in the cost of taxation. Good.
Follow-up question to that, to my colleague in
Sure.
Milwaukee County. I'm in Waukesha County. We work with Milwaukee County and the city of Milwaukee. We use a costing-based analysis in a lot of what we do. We have found, we try to do a lot of regionalization, that there is some conflict sometimes, the way we are measuring versus the way our other local governments are measuring. And we try to help with that.
Okay.
But when we try to cooperate a lot of times, sometimes when you get down to some of these factors, there's intrinsic, and you said it on one of the slides, we've always done it this way type of attitudes that if you're doing a costing and an analysis like we do at ROI very deeply, very quickly, that eliminates that. Now, that's not exactly politically expedient.
Yes.
So how do we, as local units of government, work better with each other, understanding that there are some pieces in there that are not always politically easy to overcome, but they could lead to better governance if we're allowed to do it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one lecture I use is how to completely trash a very good evaluation for nothing more than using nothing more than political terms. You know, well, you may say that program isn't effective, but I know somebody who was really helped by that, so I don't believe you. That kind of thing. Can you overcome the politics? You hope hard information would. You know, there's a RAND Corporation study on the effect of incarceration on the drug problem. Oh man, 20 years ago? It's finally starting to make headway. So that's sort of the hope of all of us that are policy analysts, that if we provide the information, that at some point somebody will actually use it. But it's still, the politics are, they're an obstacle, a huge obstacle. Yes. Excellent. Excellent, excellent. Yeah, if you want to look at evidence-based, it's everywhere. Just Google evidence-based, whatever you're interested in, and you'll probably find it. There are databases out there. They're good databases. Washington State Institute for Public Policy has got a very good database, easy to access. So. Good enough? Oh, somebody. Oh.
In the short run, I'm seeing some forced collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
In the short run, I'm seeing some forced collaborations. For instance,
Right.
what the state's doing with the two-year college system or with extension, possibly with veteran service officers. That could be a step in that direction. Certainly with many of the human service areas.
Yep.
That fits in with your efficiencies, you know, collaborating for cost efficiency, but it's drifting away from the local model of control.
Yep, yep. That's, you know, when I talked about the pendulum swinging, it swings towards centralization for things like economies of scale, and economies of scale including people, uniformity of service delivery. But it also removes the service a little ways from the citizen. It makes it a little less accountable. So I'd say ultimately, as you see these swings, they always swing back. They almost always swing back. I know of no government system throughout the world that is re-centralized.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, the last portion of our program is effectively engaging legislators. And as we've tried to do at previous legislative exchanges, we've got some feature film work we're going to show you as well, where our team has gone out and talked with legislators. Would you please join me in welcoming once again back to the podium our legislative team, Kyle Christensen, Sarah Diedrich Kasdorf, and Dan Barr.
Correct. Yep. Well, good morning. We have arrived at our final topic of our legislative conference. And again, on behalf of WCA, we want to thank all of you for making the trip, for your engagement in this conference. We really do appreciate it. Our final topic today is one that should be familiar with everybody in this room, and it's engaging state legislators, building relationships. So today we're going to ask and answer three very simple questions. First, is it important for counties to build relationships with their state legislators? Is it important from the association perspective, important to legislators? Most importantly, maybe, is it important to your constituents? Do they care? We're going to answer those questions. Next, if it is important to build those relationships, how do you facilitate the relationship building? And we'll come up with ideas and suggestions for that as well. And finally, how can your association, WCA, assist you in these efforts? We have some existing tools that we'll talk about and some new additions to help you feel comfortable and have the knowledge necessary to build these relationships. So first, is it important to build these relationships? I think we had an overwhelming yes, it is. Is it important to your association? Of course it is. That's why we're devoting time today to talk about it, and that's why we talk about it repeatedly with the membership. It is very important. While Sarah, Dan, and I are a lot of times the face of the Counties Association lobbying effort in the state capitol, our most effective tool and most effective resource is you. And I can't tell you how often I hear from county officials, well, the state legislature doesn't care what I have to say about this. They don't care about my opinion. And I don't know if it's because we're humble or what it is, but that's just not the case. You are our currency in the state capitol. When any county official, whether they're elected or they're a department head or a county staff member, contacts the legislative office, it is very, very impactful. I can't tell you how many bills we've had this session that we had positive outcomes on, not necessarily because of meetings or conversations that Sarah, Dan, or I had, but because we reached out to a county official who had a relationship with a state legislator, and that legislator said, I agree with you. I'm going all in with you. We're going to pass this bill or we're not going to pass it. Again, not because of what the association necessarily did, but because of what we did from the grassroots advocacy efforts at the local level. So from the association perspective, it is very, very important. I know a lot of times county officials think if they come to our lobby days, if they come to our conference and across to the Capitol, they're lobbying, they're participating. And they absolutely are. But I'm here to tell you today that's not enough. And you're going to hear what your constituents think. They don't think that's enough. You're going to hear from the state legislature that says that's not enough. We have to do more. So with that, we'll turn it over to Sarah to talk about whether building relationships with state legislators is important to the people you represent, the people that elected you, your constituents.
So we just heard from Kyle that it is really important to the association that county officials engage in conversations with their legislators. So we thought it was also important to find out whether or not the public, otherwise known as your constituents, think it's important for you to engage with your legislators. So we commissioned a study by the St. Norbert College Strategic Research Institute to find out. 405 telephone surveys from randomly selected state residents were completed for the study between January 15th and January 26th. So this survey took place just a couple weeks ago. Respondents were scientifically selected so that the survey would be representative of all adults 18 years old and older who reside in the state of Wisconsin. In addition, adult respondents within each household were randomly selected for participation. The sample included both landline and cell phone completions. The sample was statistically weighted to more closely reflect the demographic characteristics of the state's population. The margin of error for the survey is plus or minus 5%. So 5 questions were asked of survey participants to ascertain the public's opinion on whether or not the general public feels it is important for county officials to engage with their legislators. So question 1. To what extent do you think the Wisconsin State Legislature is aware of critical issues facing your county today? Would you say that the state legislature is well aware, moderately aware, somewhat aware, not aware, or not sure? According to the survey, 42% of the public believes that the legislature is well or moderately aware of critical issues facing counties today. However, 44% believe that the legislature is only somewhat aware or not aware of critical issues facing counties. Based on these results, the public believes that we have some work to do to ensure that the legislature is aware of critical issues facing counties today. So we next asked, how important do you think it is for elected officials in your county to have a close working relationship with state legislators from your area? Would you say that it is very important, moderately important, somewhat important, not important, or not sure? Based on the survey results, 78% of respondents feel it is very important for elected officials in their county to have a close working relationship with state legislators from their area. 16% feel it is moderately important, and 4% feel that it is somewhat important. Based on these results, there is no doubt that the public believes it is important for you to have a close working relationship with your state legislators. Because the public feels that it is very important for you to have a close working relationship with your legislators, we then ask them to rate the relationship that elected county officials from your county have with state legislators from your area. We asked if the relationship is excellent, good, fair, poor, or if they weren't sure. Again, based on survey responses, 46% of respondents rated the relationship county officials have with their state legislators as fair or poor. Only 4% rated the relationship as excellent, and 26% rated the relationship as good. So again, almost half of respondents rated the relationship county officials have with their state legislators as fair or poor. So while it is important for you to have close working relationships with your legislators, according to the public also believes that you could be doing a better job of cultivating those relationships. So then we asked, how important do you think it is for your county executive or your county board chairperson to lobby the state legislature to make sure your county's views are represented in state policies? Would you say it's very important, moderately important, somewhat important, not important, or again, they're not sure? Again, the survey results were very clear on this question. 90% of the public believe it is either very or moderately important for their county executive or county board chair to lobby the state legislature to make sure your county's views are represented in state policies. Again, 90% of the public believes it's important for you to lobby the state legislature. So then we asked them to rate the job that your county executive or your county board chair is doing in lobbying the state legislature to make sure your county's views are represented in state policies. Would you say that the county officials are doing an excellent, good, fair, or poor job, or you're just not sure? Again, the survey results show that only 33% of respondents think you are doing an excellent or good job, while 43% think you are doing a fair or poor job. So let's recap what we have learned. We learned that the public overwhelmingly believes that it is important for you as county officials to have a close working relationship with your legislator, but almost half of the respondents feel that the current relationship is fair or poor. We also learned that the vast majority of the public believes it is important for county officials to lobby the legislature so county views are represented in state policies. But again, the public believes that county officials are not doing a very good job in lobbying the legislature. So now we've heard that it's important to your association that you effectively engage with your legislators. We have learned that it's important to the public that you also engage with your legislators. But we checked with one other group to find out the importance of building relationships with legislators, and that is the legislature itself. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dan, who will share with you what legislators think about building relationships between state legislators and county officials.
Thank you, Sarah. It's good to be back with you this morning. And so after seeing those survey results, we went to the legislature and asked them a series of questions regarding the most effective way to communicate with your legislators. First question that we asked, why is it important for county officials to cultivate relationships with their legislators? Is it important?
One of the phrases that I use all the time, and that is really the world is run by those who show up. And it doesn't matter if it's the county board, if it's the town board, or the state legislature. But the problem is a lot of times, by the time you show up, decisions have already been made. So you need to have those relationships way before when the discussions are just starting, when individuals are beginning to talk about whether a bill should move forward, whether an idea should even happen, is there a real problem? Because far too often it seems like legislators find a problem and they begin to solve it before they understand, are there other things that are already being done that could potentially impact the way that we have this bill drafted or this idea that needs to be solved?
Oh, I think it's extremely important to cultivate those relationships between all governments.
It's very important to cultivate relationships with your elected officials, period, whether it's at the local level, meaning your city or village or municipality, or whether it's at the county level, or whether it's at the state level. I encourage you to do it, especially for them to cultivate as county electeds with their state elected, because we do all the things that affect counties. Counties are the arm of the state, so it's hugely important, I think, for them to cultivate those relationships.
You know, relationships are the way that the world runs together, there's no doubt about it, and politics and public policy so often intermingle. So what we always have is we try to have as many opportunities for us to sit down and chat informally so you get to know people. You build the trust that's necessary to understand someone's opinions and respect them, as opposed to a stranger coming in. The interesting thing for my job is, of course, everybody wants to lobby me on every topic, and they have every right to do so. But it's very hard to give somebody who I've just met and now know for 30 minutes the same level of credibility to somebody who I've known for years or as a local elected official in my area.
So we established on a bipartisan basis that legislators feel engagement from you is very important. And so then we asked the second question, what ideas do you have for county officials to effectively build relationships with their legislators? Is it simply an occasional phone call, an annual invite to the county board meeting, or does it involve more than that?
In order to build up those relationships and have kind of that common knowledge of how people think and work together, I don't think you get that over a phone call just on a single issue. I think it's really important that they reach out, talk to us, and build up that rapport so that kind of the chicken little theory. I mean, in this office we get a lot of people that call and the sky's always falling, and you kind of recognize that over time, where I know because of my relationships with the county board, if so-and-so calls me, it's serious and they really need help. Or if another person calls me, I may have a different perspective. So building up those relationships, reaching out, inviting, going to their Christmas party, doing those things, having a cup of coffee in the morning. We're here Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, at least Mondays and Fridays. I try and meet with local officials on, Mondays and Fridays, coffee, lunch, a cocktail, whatever the case may be.
I'm always happy when a county board member calls my office and asks for help or just to share some information about what may be happening in the county. I'm always receptive to invitations to go to county boards and present on what's happening in Madison and how it may affect the counties. So it's a mutual relationship, and I think it has to be unique to the situation in the county.
Just earlier today, I was with the Dairy Business Association, and I said to them, you need to make sure that every legislator goes and visits your farm, because knowing how something works is really important. It's interesting because I know that some counties are very engaged with their legislators. They'll have them come into meetings, they'll have them bring in for discussion, so they have that relationships. and others only see them once a year at the annual WCA Day in Madison. Which do you think is more effective? So I think that those relationships really matter.
It really involves more than just an occasional meeting. As I mentioned, I've got a pretty good rapport with my county executives and people, and we do have legislative days where they come here to the Capitol, and in turn I'm invited to their offices to meet with all the people that are active within the county government, and whether it's an elected position, a representative, or some of their staff people, or the constitutional officers. So it is extremely important, and it works both ways. I invite them here, they invite me there, and that way you're on your own turf part of the time and they're on their own turf. So, you know, you get different perspectives from different locations.
I think you should make calls. I think something that I wish I even would do better is to have some scheduled times that individuals where you cross territory, that maybe you do lunch together or coffee or open lines of communication, help people to realize the effects of what we do, how it has, what it does to the county, and frankly, the services that you provide, what effect it has on the state.
The absolute very least you should have is that every legislator should come to the county board on a regular basis. Now, in our county, a couple times a year, they will have a legislative committee meeting where they'll invite all the legislators to come in and talk about the issues that are important to them. Because I was on the county board, they have a picnic once a year, they have a dinner once a year where it's much more social. You know, you can invite legislators to those things. I think that the other idea that you need to really look at is most people, you know, we don't have offices, at least in the assembly, so you really operate out of a restaurant. So it's pretty easy to schedule a breakfast or a lunch and just take time to talk about the issues and what's going on in your community. The thing that most legislators want is they want to know what's going on too. You know, we represent the same constituents, so if you represent a part of the county, I'd love to know what kind of development's occurring there. What are the issues that people in your area are talking about that you've heard, so that I can make sure I address them too. So using each other as a resource, I would say, is probably the most productive way, as opposed to trying to just figure out some artificial number of contacts. But definitely more is better than less.
So, important question for all of you. How often should you contact your legislator?
I was going to say, you shouldn't contact them at all.
Now, in all seriousness, she was joking, but I think that this speaks to the relationship that we, as a government affairs staff, have with legislators out there, that they can joke with us back and forth. But in all seriousness, here's what Senator Taylor had to say about contacting with frequency your legislators.
I don't think there is a breaking point, at least from my perspective. I mean, of course, we don't want to be ugly to each other, because I think the reality is that when we can figure out how to work best together, it's going to be the best for our constituents. It's going to be the best for our county and for our state, candidly.
In this office, sometimes we can operate in a vacuum, and the only thing we hear are kind of from the vocal minority. It's nice to hear from other elected officials on a daily basis, weekly basis. Just, you know, I talk to my county board chairman 2-3 times a week, you know, just to say, what's going on, what are you doing, what are we doing here, what are you hearing? I think that's important. So I don't think there's ever such a thing as too much contact with your district back home.
Well, I don't know that there needs to be a limit. I have not hit a breaking point with anyone yet. I've always been very welcoming to get those calls, and I think if you openly and honestly respond to the questions, you're going to get satisfaction on the other end, and I don't think they're going to drive you crazy. You know, it needs to be an open, two-way relationship, and I've never had a problem with people overburdening me with calls or letters. So as long as you respond openly and honestly, I think it makes a big difference, and then they have a comfort level too, and so do I. When I ask for information and get it, I'm comfortable.
I would say there's not necessarily a breaking point overall, but there is a limit on how many times people contact me on one single issue. Many times somebody will propose a bill, I'll meet with you, we'll talk about the topic, I'll understand your concerns, I'll go back, I'll do my own research, and I might just disagree with you. So that, you know, and first of all, I have to be honest and tell you I disagree with you. Some people think that that means they're supposed to just keep lobbying. So what happens after a while is people have to, just as a county official would know, when you make a decision, you explain why, but then you don't want to keep having the same argument over and over and over. So I would say be as diligent as you can to make sure that they have an informed decision, but to just berate people or to constantly talk about the same topic is going to ruin that long-term relationship.
So we've established from political leaders in both parties it is important to contact your legislators, and we've gotten some ideas on how to do that. But finally, we want to ask, what are some of the most effective way groups can communicate with their legislators? What are some of the best techniques to use?
Oh, briefly and concise is always the best way to do it. You can imagine the reams of paper that come through our doors every day. So when somebody is coming to talk to us, it's always great if they have 1 to 2 pages of information and a very concise verbal appraisal of what the situation is to help us understand it.
I would say picking up the phone and calling me or inviting, just say, hey, Rob, you got time for a cup of coffee, or can you stop by the county board?
Sitting down and talking face to face, I think, is the most effective. We know that email is quick and easy, but I think face to face is the most effective. And if it is a communication that a lot of people are signed on to, I do appreciate seeing that there's more than one person that has a concern. There's a number of signers on a document. It does carry more credibility.
So, we might get 1,000 emails on a topic. Well, the ones, I care about all of them. The ones that I care about the most are the 100 that come from my own district. That's what I represent. So I think that that's where you want to make sure you have an opportunity to talk about issues one-on-one and not just have it be by an email, not just have it be a television commercial. It's really that one-on-one that you talk through and understand. I think the other thing that's not all that effective is when people don't tell you the entire story. One thing that I try to do when I meet with a lobbyist or with an interest group is to say, okay, what will your opponents say? And many times, especially local elected officials, they kind of know the one side of the equation, so you kind of have to know both sides and why somebody would be opposed. So helping to make sure that people know both sides and can actually talk about both makes for an effective lobbyist or an effective meeting too.
It's always good to do a tour and to, be hands-on, right? One-on-one kind of examples and experiences and seeing it firsthand. I always, encourage individuals to call and share with my office. But I would argue that those one-on-one opportunities, and, you don't have to come to Madison, to meet with me. We can do phone calls, we can use technology and do Skyping, we can also visit each other's areas, is very effective to me when we're doing those hands-on things, especially when we show how it directly affects our constituents. As electeds working together, love it. When it's my constituents contacting me, I love it when they're able to write and share their story or work with my office and I, to share with us what's going on. But it is, I have to admit, kind of those one-on-one experiences, or the experiences that are not one-on-one but face-to-face, or visual.
Anytime there's something that pops up in legislation, they've reached out to me, and quite frankly, every time something pops up here that I'm not sure about, I'm not an expert on all these areas, I'll fire it off to our clerk of courts or the register of deeds or the treasurer, because I need their input. How is this going to affect you? And quite frankly, WCA is a big help in that too.
So now we got to pose the question, is there any techniques or forms of communication to avoid?
Well, running TV commercials against me probably isn't all that effective.
So how can your association help you facilitate and build these relationships at the local level? First, WCA has a number of resources at our disposal that you can use to follow along what's happening in Madison. We have WisPolitics.com. That's something that we negotiate on behalf of counties. That's free of charge to anybody in the county family. And they'll give you an update day to day on what's happening in Madison, what's the latest political gossip, what's the latest political spin. It's a great resource. You have the weekly Capitol Watch. That's our weekly newsletter where we talk about which bills are having hearings in the state assembly or state senate, what the WCA position is on those bills. During the budget, something we started just a few years ago, our weekly budget webinars, where Monday of each week we hold a webinar where we talk about what the Finance Committee, what issues they're going to take up that week, what WCA's position is on those issues, and what we need you to do to help out our lobbying efforts. You have the Wheeler Report, which is a comprehensive list of all the bills that are introduced, all the bills that are passed, all the committee hearings, everything you need to know as far as what's happening in the legislature. And occasionally we have our county legislative alerts, where if we have a priority issue that needs your attention, we'll send an alert out to you via email and ask that you contact your legislator. And finally, there's Wisconsin Eye, where you can watch live stream committee hearings and action in the state legislature. Then, of course, we have our Counties Association website. Two new additions, though, that we're adding to our website. We realize that sometimes county officials are hesitant to talk to their legislators because they may not know what issues are really important or what the backstory of the issue is. So on our website, we're adding two new things under the legislative page. First will be one-page issue papers. We'll have 8 or 9 priority issues where we will have a concise one-page issue paper for you to use that includes background on the topic, requested action of the legislature, and some talking points so you're familiar with the issues that you need to talk to the legislature about. Secondly, a new addition, we're going to add a monthly update to our website. So on the first of every month, we will have a PDF on our website, a few pages long, that will talk about the priority bills of the Counties Association, who the authors are, where they're at in the legislative process, and who we need you to contact. So those new resources should be very beneficial for you in facilitating these local relationships. So getting started, when we go back to our counties, how do we start this process of local engagement? We have a number of ideas. You could hold a legislative breakfast, monthly meetings, a county budget discussion, pick a county department of the month, bring them in, have them tour that department, lunch or coffee, a county picnic. As you can see, we're not talking about just formal gatherings here, but also informal gatherings. Sometimes it's easier to build these relationships in an informal setting so that when you build that relationship, the next time you have an ask of that legislator, it's a little bit easier to make that because you've talked to them, you've built a rapport with them through some of these activities. So just to recap, what have we learned today? I think we've learned that it is very important to your association, to your constituents, and to the state legislature that you build and facilitate these relationships. We've also learned some techniques or some ways that the legislature feels you can most effectively communicate your message. And finally, we've learned that your association is going to have new tools to help you feel more comfortable developing these relationships. So with that, we thank you. At this point, we would like to open it up, though, to the membership and ask if anybody has any ideas or suggestions or anything in your county that you've done that's really proven successful to build some of these relationships. Andy.
Primarily run by our UW Extension. And we invite local legislators to that. And you folks are always at those meetings, and we really do appreciate that. However, the number of Ross, Columbia County, and we have a get-together of neighboring counties, Dodge, Sauk, Green Lake, several others, Jefferson, where we meet once a month and have topics that have been there over the last year is very appalling. I like what I saw up here, but when we offer them an opportunity to not only meet with one county, but several counties, and the leadership in those counties, we've not been successful. So I'm just wondering where some of these folks are when we ask them to come in.
Undoubtedly, Andy, it is a two-way street. You have to invite them, and they have to ultimately show up. And I think that's something that the association can help with, is going around the Capitol door to door and saying, look, you've got all these invites from your county to attend the board meetings or a regional meeting. You need to make sure that you show up. So if we're aware of when you invite legislators to meetings or events, we can help encourage the legislator to attend. Adam.
Thank you, Kyle. And first, my compliments to WCA and the staff. I've had the opportunity now to work with WCA for 20 years or better, and I don't think the team has ever been stronger, and these type of services that you're providing and the encouragement and coaching you're providing is just outstanding. So Kyle, Mark, my compliments to you and all of your team. One thing in Sheboygan County we've done that's been very successful for us is we have a legislative breakfast once a month on Monday from 8 to 9 o'clock. We've been doing this for the last couple of, I think, 20 years now. And over time, we've made it more effective in that we have almost all of our board members attend, many of our department heads. Our legislators are always there, consistently there, and it's really a positive type of feedback. I've learned over time just how the board interacts with them and thanks them for things they've done. And I see how the discourse now is the legislators not only sharing things pertinent to county government, which is refreshing rather than talking about things that may not, but pertinent to us and asking questions of our board members, thanking department heads in the room for thanks for getting me back to me last week with that information, what have you. So if you don't have anything like a legislative breakfast, simple to set up, Monday morning or Friday, probably Mondays are better, 8 to 9, and our legislators really appreciate it. I think our rapport right now with our legislators in Sheboygan County is as strong as it's ever been, and it's a real simple thing to set up. I have one of my department heads take turns every year or two being the chair of it and pulling it together, making sure everyone's on the same page and getting a heads up on it, and again, it's been very, very effective. One other thing that we do very quickly is we also have a heads of local government meeting where 3 times a year we meet with all of our town elected officials, city, village, all the top elected officials, meet with them as well to get their input, interact, and invite the state legislators to that as well. So those 2 forums have really been successful for us.
Sarah.
Hi. In Waukesha County, we've been doing a couple events the last couple years, having a lot of success related to health and human services programs. So we've invited our legislators in to, I don't know what I'm doing, hand out backpacks to kids in need. We have what's called the Backpack Coalition, and we gather school supplies for kids in need, and then we hand them out before school starts, and I invite our county board supervisors and legislators to come to that event. We also invite them to work at our senior dining sites and do Meals on Wheels. So I set them up with a volunteer, give them a map that has houses in their district, and they can deliver meals to those kids or those seniors, and or work at the senior dining site. And it's a great way to connect with their constituents too. We also allow them to do snowplow ride-alongs or tour 911 center, anything to get them into the county just to see how great we operate and understand how we operate.
Anyone else? Okay, so I think we have a lot of ideas. Again, the association is here to help. Anything that we can do, whether it's helping facilitate the meeting or if it's more information that you need, we're happy to do that. But again, we thank you for your engagement in this process, and we encourage you to really keep up the good work. So thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, while we interviewed just a few of these legislators, quite frankly, and they said yes immediately, we could have asked any one of your legislators, would you like to be on camera and answer these questions? And I am absolutely convinced every legislator in the building would have said absolutely. I think the ideas that you raised here today, if you want advice or the logistics on how you might do that, I know I can speak very freely for Adam. Adam would love to lay out for you exactly how he does it and actually provide assistance. If you heard from Sarah about how they do the human services get-together, she'd be more than happy to assist you and help you set up yours. These are very good ideas. Along these lines, the Wisconsin Counties Association is not a partisan organization. We're nonpartisan. But we are very political, and there's a big difference. We have to understand the landscape. That's part of what you ask us to do as your staff. It is a rocky, rough landscape. It requires a lot of maneuvering. So something that might seem obvious to you on the surface, the association ought to be in this position on this particular issue. It's not quite as clean or clear in many cases. We may be massaging a particular issue with a certain position because it has greater implications on other positions or sets us up for a better position in the future. That's part of what you ask the legislative team to do, part of the intellect and strategy thinking and futuristic positioning that you want Kyle and his team to do. And they're very good at it. So if there is an occasion or an issue where you say, I wonder why the association is in that particular position, I wonder why we've positioned ourselves in that particular way, call us. We'll help explain it. There is rationale for it. We do an awful lot of what-ifing in our organization. We do an awful lot of laying a brick today for a house that's going to be built 5 years from now. We do that. I think we're very good at futuristic thinking. We do it an awful lot. We do a lot of that. That's all in support of what you do for the citizens of this state. I love every level of government and every local unit of government in our state. But I will say this: if we are going to succeed as a state, if we are going to have success as an economy, if Wisconsin is going to reach heights never before dreamed, it will be because county government is successful. And if county government is to be successful, that means you have driven it. You have made it happen. You have built your communities. You have assisted those that you represent to achieve more than they thought they could. It will be because of you. And in that, I, the entire staff, and on behalf of President Lance Plimmel, we believe that absolutely can be done. Thank you very much for attending this 2016 Legislative Exchange, and I wish you all the luck in the world driving back today. Wish you well. Thank you very much. Thank you.